The winter of 1878 carved its name into the Wyoming territory with teeth of ice and wind that could strip flesh from bone. It was the kind of cold that made strong men weep and weak men die. But Abigail Harmon wasn't weeping, and she damn sure wasn't dying. Not today, not on that frozen riverbank where fate had drawn a line in the snow and dared her to cross it. Some say destiny announces itself with thunder. For Abigail, it came as a dark smudge against white ice, barely visible through swirling snow, a man's body, halfway submerged in the frozen Sweetwater River. A stranger with copper skin and raven hair, bleeding into water that crystallized around his wounds. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The choice she made that day would alter not just 2 lives, but the very fabric of a valley torn by mistrust and bloodshed. This is the story of an encounter that defied the bitter divisions of a wounded land, where a woman's courage and a warrior's vision wove together a truth stronger than hatred, deeper than difference. The wagon creaked over frozen earth, each jolt traveling through wooden wheels and up Abigail's spine like a reminder of how far she'd come from anything resembling civilization. Her knuckles were white around the reins, not from fear, but from the cold that had settled into her bones over the 3 days of traveling alone from Fort Bridger. The mule, stubborn, pragmatic, and currently the closest thing she had to a friend, trudged forward with the same grim determination that had carried Abigail through the last year of her life. She'd left Philadelphia 13 months ago, following her brother Thomas West after their parents' passing. "Land," he'd written, "more than you can imagine, Abby, and a chance to build something that's truly ours." Now Thomas was in the ground himself, taken by fever 5 months past, leaving her with a half-built cabin, 40 acres of unclaimed promise, and neighbors who viewed a woman alone with equal parts pity and suspicion. The snow had started falling. At dawn, light at first, then growing heavier as the afternoon wound on. Abigail pulled her woolen scarf tighter across her face, squinting into the whiteness. She should have stayed in town another day. That's what Everett at the general store had told her. "Storm's coming in from the north," he'd warned as he loaded. "Her supplies, bad one." But supplies weren't the only thing Abigail had come for. News had arrived, whispers of Indian troubles, of a band of Shoshone moving south through the territory, of settlers going missing. "You best be careful out there, Miss Harmon," Everett had said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Things are getting tense. Colonel Morrison's talking about sending a patrol out toward the riverlands. Clean things up if you take." My meaning? She took his meaning just fine, which was precisely why she decided not to wait out the storm. Whatever cleaning up entailed, Abigail wanted no part of it. She'd seen enough of man's inhumanity to last several lifetimes. The wind picked up, howling through the pine trees that lined the narrow trail. The mule snorted in protest, its pace slowing. Abigail checked the position of the sun, a pale smudge behind thick clouds, and calculated she had perhaps 2 hours before darkness fell. Not enough time to reach her cabin. She'd have to find shelter soon. The Sweetwater River lay ahead, winding, like a silver-black serpent through the snow-covered landscape. In summer, it ran fast and clear, but winter had frozen it into submission. Still, the ice was treacherous, especially with a loaded wagon. Abigail knew a crossing a half-mile downstream, where the river narrowed and the ice grew thickest. It would add time to her journey, but it was better than risking a breakthrough. As she guided the mule down the sloping bank, something caught her eye, a dark shape on the ice, perhaps 50 yards upstream. At first, she thought it might be a fallen tree limb or even a deer that had broken through and frozen. But there was something about the shape that made her pull the wagon to a halt. "Steady," she murmured to the mule, securing the reins and climbing down. The snow was knee-deep, in places, and each step required effort. She trudged toward the shape, her heart quickening despite her attempts to remain calm. As she drew closer, the dark smudge resolved into the unmistakable outline of a human form. A man lay half submerged in the ice, one arm stretched across the frozen surface, as if he'd been trying to pull himself out when the cold had finally overcome him. Dark hair fanned out around his head, stark against the white. For a terrible moment, Abigail thought she was looking at a corpse. Then his fingers twitched. "My God," she breathed, caution forgotten as she rushed forward. The ice creaked ominously beneath her weight, and she dropped to her hands and knees, spreading her body flat to distribute the pressure. She crawled the remaining distance. He was Shoshone. That much was immediately clear from his clothing and features. Blood had frozen in a dark crust along his temple and across the front of his buckskin shirt. One leg was bent at an angle that made Abigail's stomach clench, but it was his eyes that stopped her cold when they suddenly fluttered open, black as obsidian, fierce with pain and suspicion. He said something in a language she didn't understand, his voice barely a rasp. "I'm going to help you," Abigail said, knowing he probably couldn't understand her either. "But I need you to stay still." The warrior's gaze locked with hers for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he gave a small, sharp nod. Getting him out of the ice took every ounce of strength Abigail possessed. The freezing water had partially sealed around his lower body, and she had to break it away piece by piece, using a knife from her belt. His skin was dangerously cold to the touch, his breathing shallow. Twice she thought she'd lost him, only to see his chest rise with another stubborn breath. When she finally managed to free him, the real challenge began, moving him to the wagon. He was a tall man, all lean muscle under soaked buckskins, and his injured leg made it impossible for him to help. In the end, Abigail fashioned a crude sled from her coat, laying him on it and dragging him through the snow. By the time they reached the wagon, her muscles screamed with exhaustion, and her hands were raw and bleeding from the cold. Getting him into the wagon bed nearly broke her. She heaved and pulled, speaking encouragements that were as much for herself as for him. "Almost there, just a little more. You're going to be all right." Finally, he lay in the back of the wagon, and Abigail covered him with every blanket she could spare. The storm was worsening by the minute. She needed to find shelter, and fast. There was an old trapper's cabin about a mile east, abandoned years ago but still standing. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The mule protested the additional. "Wait," but Abigail was in no mood for arguments. "Move," she commanded, snapping the reins. Reluctantly, the animal trudged forward through deepening snow. By the time they reached the cabin, darkness had fallen completely, and the temperature had dropped to a bone-shattering chill. The cabin was little more than a shack, one room with a stone fireplace, a dirt floor, and more gaps than walls, but it was a shelter. Moving the warrior inside was another ordeal, but fear of freezing to death lent Abigail strength she didn't know she possessed. She managed to drag him across the threshold and position him near the fireplace, where she immediately set about building a fire with the small stock of wood left by previous occupants. As flames flickered to life, she got her first good look at the extent of his injuries. The head wound wasn't as bad as she'd feared. Scalp wounds always bled dramatically, but his leg was definitely broken, and there was a deep gash across his ribs that needed tending. He'd lost consciousness again, which was perhaps a mercy. Considering what needed to be done, Abigail was no doctor, but she'd assisted Thomas enough times with injuries on their journey west to know the basics. She cut away the frozen buckskin from his torso, cleaned the wound with melted snow water, and bandaged it using strips torn from her spare petticoat. The broken leg was more challenging. She fashioned a splint from pieces of kindling, binding it tightly with more fabric strips. Throughout her ministrations, the warrior remained unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. His skin was warming gradually, color returning to his face. In the firelight, Abigail studied him. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. A scar ran from the corner of his right eye down his cheek, white against copper skin. Despite his injuries, there was a dignity to his features, a pride that transcended his current vulnerability. "You're a long way from your people," she murmured, tucking blankets around him. The storm howled outside, rattling the cabin's flimsy walls. Abigail fed more wood to the fire, then tended to the mule, bringing it as close to the cabin as possible, and covering it with a tarp. The poor beast had earned its rest. Back inside, she ate a cold supper of jerky and hardtack, too exhausted to prepare anything more substantial. The warrior hadn't stirred, but his breathing seemed stronger now. Abigail arranged herself on the opposite side of the fire, her rifle within easy reach. She wasn't naive. Helping him had been the right thing to do, the only thing her conscience would allow, but she knew the risks. If he woke disoriented or angry, if his people came looking for him, well, good intentions wouldn't stop a knife or an arrow. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by the need to feed the fire and check on her patient. Sometime in the darkest hours of night, she woke to find him watching her through half-lidded eyes. "Water," she said, holding a cup to his lips. He drank greedily, then sank back, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. "My name is Abigail," she said, pointing to herself. "Abigail." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "Takoda." His voice was deep despite its weakness, the word rolling from his tongue with a musicality that made it sound like more than just a name. "Takoda," she repeated, testing the sound. "Rest now, Takoda." Dawn broke cold and clear, the storm having spent its fury overnight. The world outside the cabin was transformed, buried under nearly 3 feet of pristine snow. It would be impossible to travel until it melted somewhat. Days, perhaps a week. Takoda's condition had improved marginally. He was fully conscious now, watching Abigail's every move with wary eyes as she prepared a thin broth from her supplies. His leg clearly caused him pain, but he made no sound of complaint, his face a mask of stoic endurance. "You need to eat," she said, approaching him with the steaming cup. He accepted it cautiously, sniffing the contents before taking a tentative sip. Communication was limited to gestures and simple words, but they managed. Takoda indicated he understood some English. Trading. Words mostly, enough to make basic needs known. He'd been separated from his hunting party during the storm, he conveyed, then attacked by 2 white men who'd shot him and left him for dead in the river. He'd managed to drag himself partially onto the ice before his strength gave out. "Soldiers?" Abigail asked, a cold feeling settling in her stomach as she remembered Everett's words about Colonel Morrison's patrols. Takoda shook his head. "Trappers," he said, one of the English words he knew. "Bad men." The day passed slowly. Abigail ventured outside briefly to gather more wood and check their surroundings. The mule was holding up well despite the cold, and there was no sign of anyone else for miles around. The isolation that had seemed oppressive before now felt like a blessing. Back inside, she found Takoda attempting to sit up, his face pale with the effort. "You shouldn't," she began, but the determination in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she moved to help him, supporting his weight as he adjusted to a seated position against the wall. "Thank you," he said in careful English. "For my life." The simple statement caught her off guard. "Anyone would have done the same," she replied automatically. Takoda shook his head, a hint of grim humor touching his lips. "No, not anyone." There was truth in his words that Abigail couldn't deny. Most settlers she knew would have ridden past, a wounded Indian without a second thought. Some would have finished what the trappers started. The realization sat uncomfortably between them. As daylight faded, Takoda's fever began to rise. The wound on his ribs had become inflamed, angry red lines spreading outward from the edges. infection, the killer that claimed more lives than bullets or blades ever did. Abigail bathed his forehead with snow water and redressed the wound. But she knew it wasn't enough. "Medicine?" she asked, mimicking drinking something. Dakota's eyes, bright with fever, focused on her face. With effort, he gestured toward his pouch, which she'd placed with his other belongings near the fire to dry. Abigail retrieved it, watching as his shaking hands sorted through various small containers until he found what he wanted, a small leather packet containing dried leaves and roots. He pantomimed boiling them, then drinking. The herbal concoction filled the cabin with a pungent, earthy smell as it steeped. Dakota drank it down without hesitation, then sank back into a fevered sleep. Abigail maintained her vigil through another night, applying cold compresses and murmuring encouragements that he couldn't hear. By morning, his fever had broken, leaving him weak but clear-eyed. The angry red lines had receded somewhat from the wound. Abigail nearly wept with relief. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Strong medicine," she said, gesturing to his pouch. "Strong woman," he replied, his gaze steady on her face. The days that followed established a fragile routine. The snow began to melt under a strengthening sun, creating rivulets of water that streamed past the cabin. Dakota's strength returned gradually. He taught Abigail words in his language. She shared her limited supplies unstintingly. They spoke little of the world beyond their temporary shelter, of tensions between their peoples, of what would happen when the snow melted enough for travel. On the 5th day, Dakota was sitting by the doorway, his splinted legs stretched before him, carving something from a piece of wood with a small knife. Abigail was outside, checking the condition of the trail. The mule had wandered a short distance to graze on exposed grass. "Abigail!" She turned at the sound of her name. Dakota was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I saw you," he said in his improving English. "Before." "Before? You mean on the river?" He shook his head. "Before the river, in my dream." His hands moved expressively, trying to bridge the gap between languages. "5 moons ago, dream vision showed woman. Your face said you would come. Life bringer." Abigail stared at him, uncertain how to respond. "I don't understand." "Vision, Equest," he explained slowly. "Alone on the mountain. 4 days, no food, no water. Spirits show what will be." He touched his chest, then pointed to her. "Show you." A chill that had nothing to do with the weather ran through Abigail. She wasn't superstitious by nature, had never put much stock in prophetic dreams or divine intervention, but the certainty in Dakota's eyes was unsettling. "Why would your spirits show you me?" she asked. Dakota was silent for a long moment, his fingers working the piece of wood. "Not know yet," he finally said, "but I will." He held out the carving to her, a small bird taking flight, its wings outstretched. "Like this, path not clear until we fly." Abigail accepted the carving, feeling the smooth contours of the wood against her palm. Whatever Dakota believed he'd seen in his vision, there was no denying the strange circumstances that had brought them together. Of all the places she could have been during that storm, she'd ended up at exactly the right spot on the river at exactly the right time. Coincidence? Perhaps. But as she looked from the wooden bird to the man who'd created it, Abigail couldn't shake the feeling that they'd both crossed some invisible boundary. That the river ice hadn't been the only thing broken that day. The snow continued to melt under the February sun. Soon they would have to leave this precarious sanctuary and face whatever waited beyond. Dakota would return to his people, Abigail to her lonely cabin. The thought filled her with a nameless dread, as if something vital would be lost when they parted ways. That night, as they sat by the fire sharing the last of her coffee, Dakota suddenly stiffened, his head turning toward the door. What is it? Abigail whispered, reaching instinctively for her rifle. Horses, he said, his voice barely audible. Coming. Through the stillness of the night, Abigail heard it too. The distant sound of hoofbeats approaching through melting snow. Not one rider, but several, moving with purpose toward their temporary refuge. Dakota's eyes met hers across the dying fire, a silent understanding passing between them. Their brief peace was over. The world they'd temporarily held at bay had found them. At last, Abigail extinguished the lamp with one quick breath. Darkness enveloped the cabin, broken only by dying embers in the fireplace, casting ghostly shadows across Dakota's face. His expression had transformed. Gone was the vulnerability of recovery, replaced by the focused vigilance of a hunter. Despite his broken leg, he straightened, one hand gripping a knife that had materialized from somewhere beneath his blanket. How many? Abigail whispered, her rifle already in her hands. Dakota tilted his head, listening intently. 4, maybe 5, he replied, his voice low. Heavy horses, soldiers. The word hung between them like an executioner's blade. Soldiers meant Colonel Morrison's men, and if they were this far out in a half-melted February landscape, they weren't on a social call. They can't find you here, Abigail said, mind racing through limited options. The cabin had no cellar, no hidden spaces, just 4 walls and a roof full of gaps. Dakota's eyes glinted in the dim light. Leave me your gun. Go now. Say you travel. Alone. The suggestion made perfect sense. It was also impossible. They'll kill you, she said simply. And you, if they find me. His logic was irrefutable. The hoofbeats grew louder, no more than 5 minutes away. Abigail made her decision. Put these on, she said, thrusting a bundle of Thomas's old clothes at him. And cover your hair. Dakota stared at the offered garments. Worn. Trousers, a flannel shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat. Understanding dawned in his eyes. They will not believe. They'll believe what I tell them, Abigail replied, already helping him change. You're my guide, hired in Fort Bridger. You broke your leg when our wagon slipped on the ice. We're waiting out the melt. Dakota's movements were swift despite his injury, stripping off his buckskins and pulling on the white man's clothes. He grimaced as the fabric touched his healing wound. My face! Half the men west of the Mississippi are part Mexican or Indian, Abigail said, tucking his long hair beneath the hat. Keep your head down and let me do the talking. By the time the riders appeared through the trees, Dakota was seated by the rekindled fire, shoulders hunched beneath Thomas's too large coat. A hat pulled low, Abigail stood in the doorway, rifle casually at her side, hand raised in greeting. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained composed. 4 men on horseback approached, blue uniforms stark against the snow. The lead rider was a lieutenant, young but with hard eyes that had seen too much frontier violence. 2 more soldiers flanked him, and at the rear rode an older man in civilian clothes, his face weathered like tanned leather. "Ma'am," the lieutenant called, reining his horse to a stop. "Lieutenant James Reynolds, United States Army. Didn't expect to find anyone out here." "Abigail Harmon," she replied. "My homestead's about 15 miles west. Got caught in the storm coming back from Fort Bridger." Reynolds's gaze moved past her to the cabin interior, lingering on Dakota's hunched form. "You're not alone." It wasn't a question. Abigail didn't treat it as one. "My guide, Daniel, broke his leg when our wagon slipped crossing the Sweetwater. We've been waiting for the trails to clear." The lieutenant dismounted, his boots crunching in the crusted snow. The civilian remained on his horse, watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. "Mind if we warm ourselves at your fire, Miss Harmon? Been riding since dawn." It wasn't really a request. Abigail stepped aside, every muscle tense as the soldiers filed into the cramped cabin. The civilian dismounted last, moving with the loose-limbed grace of a man who'd spent his life outdoors. "Travis Holt," he introduced himself with a nod that was barely civil. "Scout for the colonel." Inside, the soldiers arranged themselves around the fire, casting curious glances at Takoda, who kept his eyes on the flames. Lieutenant Reynolds removed his gloves, warming his hands. "You're a long way from neighbors, Miss Harmon," he observed. "Dangerous country for a woman alone." "I manage," Abigail replied. "Coffee?" "Much obliged." She busied herself with the pot, grateful for the distraction. Holt remained standing, his gaze moving methodically around the cabin, taking in every detail. His eyes lingered on Takoda's splintered leg. "Nasty break," he commented. "How'd it happen exactly?" Before Abigail could answer, Takoda spoke, his voice deliberately rough, accent suppressed. "Ice gave way under the wagon. Went wrong." Holt's eyes narrowed a fraction. "You don't sound like you're from around here, Daniel." "California," Takoda replied, still not looking up. "Worked in the mines, then trails." The scout grunted, unconvinced, but not openly challenging the claim. Lieutenant Reynolds accepted the coffee Abigail offered, seeming more interested in getting warm than in interrogation. "What brings the army this far from Fort Bridger?" Abigail asked, keeping her tone conversational. Reynolds sipped his coffee before answering. "Patrol! There's been trouble with a band of Shoshone. Killed 2 trappers last week near Medicine Bow. Colonel's orders are to locate their camp." "Didn't just kill them," Holt interjected, his voice hard. "Butchered them, scalped Peters, left." Wilson with his throat cut ear to ear. Abigail's hands tightened around her cup. "How awful," she managed. "Savages," one of the other soldiers muttered. "Got what they deserved," Takoda said suddenly. The cabin went silent. All eyes turned to him. "Those trappers," he continued, looking up just enough to reveal the planes of his face without fully meeting anyone's gaze. "Heard talk in Fort Bridger. They raided a Shoshone hunting camp first. Killed women." Holt's hand drifted toward his pistol. "You seem mighty informed, friend." "News travels," Takoda replied with a shrug. "Man hears things." Lieutenant Reynolds frowned. "That's not the report we received." "Never is," Takoda muttered. An uncomfortable silence followed. Abigail's mind raced, seeking a way to deflect the growing tension. Outside, one of the horses nickered nervously. "When do you expect the trails will be passable?" she asked the lieutenant. Reynolds seemed grateful for the change in subject. "Another day or 2 of this sun. The main routes should be manageable. You'd be wise to head back to your homestead as soon as possible, Miss Harmon. This situation with the Shoshone, it's likely to get worse before it gets better." "I appreciate the warning," she replied. "We'll move on as soon as Daniel can travel." Holt was still watching Takoda, his eyes calculating. "Don't believe I caught your last name, Daniel." Before Takoda could respond, a commotion erupted outside, horses whinnying, hooves stamping. One of the soldiers hurried to the door. "Lieutenant, riders approaching from the east." Reynolds was on his feet instantly. "How many?" "Can't tell yet, sir. At least 3. The lieutenant grabbed his rifle. "Holt, Jenkins, with me. Perkins, stay." "Here." As the men filed out, leaving only the youngest soldier behind, Abigail caught Takoda's eye. A silent message passed between them. This situation had just become infinitely more dangerous. Through the cabin's single window, Abigail watched 3 riders emerge from the tree line. Even at a distance, there was no mistaking them for soldiers or settlers. They sat their horses with the fluid ease of men born to the saddle, their hair long and loose beneath eagle-feathered bands. Shoshone warriors. "Sweet Jesus!" the remaining soldier breathed, raising his rifle. "Wait!" Abigail said sharply. "They're not attacking." Indeed, the warriors had stopped a respectful distance away. One raised an empty hand in what appeared to be a gesture of parley. Lieutenant Reynolds and his men maintained their defensive positions, weapons ready. Inside the cabin, Takoda had gone very still. His eyes, when they met Abigail's, held a mixture of resignation and determination. "My brother," he said softly. "Kemi," He leads them. The warrior who had raised his hand spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the crisp air. Though Abigail couldn't understand the words, the cadence suggested a question. Holt conferred briefly with Reynolds, then called back in halting but comprehensible Shoshone. The exchange continued for several tense moments. Then Holt turned toward the cabin. "They're looking for someone," he called. "A warrior. Say he was wounded near the river 5 days ago." Abigail's throat went dry. Beside her, the young soldier's finger tightened on his trigger. "Sir, orders?" Outside, Lieutenant Reynolds hesitated, clearly weighing his options. 3 warriors against 4 soldiers were reasonable odds, but there could be more Shoshone nearby. And if the warriors were telling the truth, they were simply searching for one of their own, not looking for a fight. "Tell them we've seen no warriors," Reynolds finally called to Holt. "Advise them to return to their people and move north out of the territory." Holt relayed the message. The lead warrior, Kemi, listened impassively, then responded with what sounded like a challenge. "He says they found blood and tracks leading this way," Holt translated. "Says they won't leave without their brother." The impasse stretched taut as a bowstring. Any wrong move from either side would end in bloodshed. Abigail looked at Dakota, torn between impossible choices. "Let me go," he whispered, leaning heavily on Thomas's old walking stick. "Or many die here today. They'll shoot you the moment. You step outside in those clothes," she replied, "and me for harboring you." Dakota's expression was resolute. "Trust me." Before she could respond, he thumped his walking stick against the floor 3 times, loud, deliberate impacts that seemed to echo in the tense silence. Outside, Kemi's head snapped toward the cabin. He called out a single word. In one fluid motion, despite his injured leg, Dakota pulled Thomas's hat from his head, letting his long black hair fall free. "My brother calls," he said, loud enough to be heard outside. Then to Abigail, "Help me stand." The young soldier gaped, rifle wavering. Between Dakota and Abigail. "Lieutenant," he shouted, "the guide, he's one of them." Reynolds turned, his expression darkening as he took in the scene through the open door, Dakota with his concealment abandoned, Abigail supporting his weight as he struggled to stand. "Step away from him, Miss Harmon," the lieutenant ordered, his voice deadly calm. "He's injured," Abigail replied. "He needs help." "Step away." Each word was carved from ice. Outside, the warriors had begun to advance slowly, weapons ready. The situation was deteriorating by the second. "No more blood," Dakota said, his voice carrying to both groups. He spoke first in Shoshone to his brother, then in English to the soldiers. "We go in peace. No one needs to die today." Lieutenant Reynolds's face was a mask of conflicted duty. Abigail could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, the report he would have to write, the explanation to his colonel, the potential consequences of either action. "You lied to us," he said to Abigail, anger and betrayal evident in his tone. "I saved a dying man," she replied steadily. "Would you have done differently if you'd found him half frozen in that river?" "She is a medicine woman," Dakota added. "Honored among my people. Her life is sacred." Holt spat on the ground. "Sacred, my ass. She's a traitor." "Enough," Reynolds snapped. To Dakota, "Your people killed 2 white men last week." "After they killed our women and children," Kem called out in accented but clear English, surprising everyone. "We seek only justice, as you would." A heavy silence fell. The young soldier in the cabin looked desperately toward his lieutenant, awaiting orders. The warriors remained poised to attack at any sign of aggression. Reynolds' shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, the weight of command settling on him. "Lower your weapons," he finally ordered his men. "But keep them ready." Turning to Kemi, he said, "Take your brother and go. But tell your chief that Colonel Morrison won't stop hunting your band until those responsible for killing the trappers are handed over." Keem's expression remained impassive. "Tell your colonel that justice flows both ways. When he punishes the men who murdered our women, we will consider his demand." Reynolds's jaw tightened, but he gave a curt nod. "Miss Harmon," he said without looking at her, "I suggest you vacate this cabin immediately. It's no longer safe for you here." Abigail helped Dakota toward the door. Each step was an agony for him, but he refused to show weakness before the soldiers. As they passed Lieutenant Reynolds, she paused. "The world isn't as simple as you want it to be, Lieutenant," she said quietly. "Neither are people." His eyes met hers briefly. "That's what makes it dangerous, Miss Harmon." Then louder, "Jenkins, help Miss Harmon with her belongings. We're escorting her back to her homestead." "No," Abigail said firmly. "I'll go with them." A stunned silence followed her declaration. Holt's incredulous laugh broke it. "You'll go with the savages? Have you lost your mind, woman?" Dakota straightened as much as his injuries allowed. "She will be an honored guest, protected. You can't possibly trust them," Reynolds protested. Abigail's smile was thin. "More than I trust the alternatives at present." The lieutenant looked as though he wanted to argue further, but something in her expression stopped him. "On your own head be it," he said finally. "But know this, if you cross this line, there's no coming back. You'll be an outcast among your own kind." "Perhaps," she replied. "I'll find better company elsewhere." Outside, Keme dismounted and approached cautiously, eyes never leaving the soldiers' weapons. Up close, the resemblance between the brothers was striking, the same proud features, the same obsidian eyes. But where pain had etched lines into Dakota's face, Keme's was marked by authority and caution. He spoke rapidly to Dakota in their language, his expression darkening as he examined his brother's injuries. Dakota responded, gesturing once toward Abigail. Kem's gaze shifted to her, assessing. "My brother says you pulled him from the ice," he said in that same accented English. "That your hands brought him back from the spirit world." "I did what anyone would do," Abigail replied. "No," Keme said, echoing his brother's earlier words. "Not anyone." He inclined his head, not quite a bow, but a gesture of respect nonetheless. "You will come to our camp. Be welcome." Lieutenant Reynolds made one last attempt. "Miss Harmon, I strongly advise—" "Thank you, Lieutenant," Abigail cut him off, "but my mind is made up." Within minutes, her few belongings were packed and loaded. Onto her mule, the soldiers watched in stony silence as Kemi helped Dakota mount behind one of the warriors. Abigail took the reins of her mule from Jenkins, who wouldn't meet her eyes. "You tell Colonel Morrison what happened here," she said to Reynolds. "All of it, including how those trappers died and why." The lieutenant's expression was unreadable. "Safe journey, Miss Harmon. I hope you don't live to regret this choice. Our grandmother is a wise woman. She will explain what this means." Kem's expression softened slightly. "Until then, you are under my protection." As the day wore on, they traveled deeper into territory Abigail had never seen, following game, trails through dense pine forests, ascending ridges that offered breathtaking views of valleys untouched by settlements. The warriors moved with the confidence of men traversing their ancestral lands, reading the landscape like a familiar book. Dakota rode silently most of the time, the pain of his injuries evident in the tightness around his eyes. Occasionally he would speak with Kemi in their language, the musical cadence rising and falling like the land around them. By late afternoon, they reached a sheltered ravine where a small stream cut through rocky outcroppings. The warriors dismounted, clearly intending to make camp for the night. Keme helped Dakota from the horse, easing him down against a boulder. "Rest here," he told Abigail. "We hunt, need food." Left alone with Dakota, Abigail busied herself making a fire, grateful for the familiar task. The day's events swirled in her mind like leaves in a whirlwind. Had she made an irrevocable mistake, or taken the first step on a path she was always meant to walk? "You are troubled," Takoda observed, his dark eyes reflecting the first flames of the fire. "Wouldn't you be?" she countered, feeding small twigs to the growing blaze. "I've just abandoned everything I knew." "Not everything," he said. "You still have your courage, your healing hands." He paused. "Your stubbornness." Despite herself, Abigail smiled. "Is that how Shoshone men traditionally thank women who save their lives? By calling them stubborn?" A hint of answering humor touched his lips. "Is traditional high praise. Stubborn ones survive." The simple truth of it struck her. Survival on this frontier, for his people or for hers, required a certain obstinate refusal to yield, whether to nature's harshness or man's cruelty. "Your brother," she said, changing the subject, "will he truly welcome me among your people?" Takoda's expression grew thoughtful. "Keme is cautious, has seen much betrayal from White World." He touched the healing wound at his side. "But he honors life debt and respects vision messages." "And the others? Your people? Some will be welcome, some will fear, some will wait and watch." His gaze held hers. "Like your people would if I came to your town." The parallel was undeniable. Abigail nodded slowly. "Fair enough." As darkness settled around them, Kim and the others returned with 2 rabbits. The meal was simple, but nourishing. Meat roasted over the fire, supplemented with dried berries and roots from the warriors' provisions. They ate mostly in silence, the crackle of the fire filling the space where conversation might have been. After the meal, one of the warriors, a younger man named Hinto, produced a small wooden flute. The melody he played was haunting, rising, and falling like wind through distant canyons. Abigail found herself transfixed by the simple beauty of it. "He plays for the stars," Takoda explained softly. "Old song, asking night spirits for protection, under the vast canopy of stars, surrounded." By men whose language and customs were foreign to her, Abigail felt a strange sense of peace descend. The world she had left behind seemed suddenly small and constrained, bound by invisible walls of prejudice and fear. As she spread her blanket near the fire, Keme approached, kneeling beside her. "Tomorrow we reach our winter camp," he said. "Our grandmother, Takoda's and mine, will want to hear how you saved him." "I only did what needed doing," Abigail replied. Keme studied her face in the firelight. "Perhaps, or perhaps the Great Spirit guided your steps to that river for a purpose we do not yet see." He rose to his feet. "Sleep well, Abigail Harmon. Tomorrow, new path begins." As she drifted toward sleep, Abigail's last conscious thought was of Lieutenant Reynolds's warning, "If you cross this line, there's no coming back." She had indeed crossed a line, not just a physical boundary, but a threshold between worlds. What waited on the other side remained to be seen. One thing was certain. There was no going back to the woman she had been before she pulled a wounded warrior from the river Ice. Dawn broke in ribbons of gold and crimson across the eastern ridges. Abigail woke to the unfamiliar sounds of a camp stirring, soft footfalls on frosted ground, the gentle nickering of horses, murmured conversations in a language that flowed like water over stones. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind. Then memory rushed back. The soldiers, the confrontation, her decision to follow Takoda and his brother. She sat up, drawing her blanket closer against the morning chill. Across the remains of last night's fire, Takoda was already awake, conferring quietly with Keme. The 2 brothers paused when they noticed her stirring. "You slept well?" Keme asked, his English careful but improving with each exchange. "Better than expected," Abigail admitted, running fingers through her tangled hair. In truth, she had slept more soundly than any night since Thomas's passing, as if some burden had been lifted with her decision to leave her old life behind. Hinto, the young warrior who had played the flute the previous evening, approached with a wooden cup containing a steaming liquid. He offered it with a shy nod, avoiding direct eye contact. "Thank you," Abigail said, accepting the drink. The aroma that rose from it was unfamiliar, earthy and herbal, with hints of pine and something sweeter. She took a cautious sip. The flavor was strange but not unpleasant, warming her from within. "Tea," Dakota explained. "Cedar, pine, berries, good for strength." They broke camp efficiently, leaving barely a trace of their presence. Abigail marveled at how different this was from the settler caravans she'd traveled with, which left behind trampled grass, chopped trees, and scattered refuse. The Shoshone moved through the landscape like wind through grass, present, powerful, but ultimately harmonious. Keme set a brisk pace, clearly eager to reach their winter camp before midday. Dakota rode silently, his pain evident in the tightness around his eyes, but he made no complaint. Abigail found herself riding alongside Hinto, who watched her with undisguised curiosity. "Your people," he said suddenly, his English more heavily accented than the brothers. "Think all Shoshone are the same, but many bands, many ways." "I don't think all Shoshone are the same," Abigail replied carefully, "but I know very little about your people." Hinto's expression brightened. "My father was a great chief, knew Lewis and Clark when they passed through our lands." There was pride in his voice. "Traded with them, helped them find their way west." The mention of the famous expedition surprised Abigail. "That was before I was born," she said quickly, calculating the years. "More than 70 years ago." Hinto nodded solemnly. "My people remember, keep stories." His eyes grew serious. "White men's papers remember different things than our stories. Sometimes the stories are not same." The simple observation carried wisdom beyond the young man's years. History, Abigail realized, depended greatly on who was telling it. The conflicts between settlers and native peoples might look very different when viewed from the other side. As the sun climbed higher, they crested a pine-covered ridge, and the landscape opened before them. A wide valley spread below, cradled between steep mountainsides. A river, perhaps a tributary of the Sweetwater, curved through its center like a silver ribbon. Near the river's bend, Abigail spotted the winter camp, a cluster of perhaps 20, lodges arranged in a rough circle, smoke rising from cook fires in delicate grey plumes. Keme halted their small party at the ridge's edge, raising his hand in a gesture that appeared part greeting, part signal. From the camp below, figures emerged from lodges, looking upward. A rider detached from the camp, galloping up the slope toward them. "Sentinel," Dakota explained to Abigail. "Always watching approaches to camp." The scout reached them quickly, exchanging rapid words with Kemi. His eyes widened when he noticed Abigail, then narrowed as he took in Dakota's injuries. More words flowed, the tone questioning. "He asks why you bring white woman?" Dakota translated. "Keme explains you saved me from death." The scout's expression remained suspicious, but he nodded once before turning his horse to lead them down into the valley. As they descended, Abigail felt anxiety tightening her chest. She was about to enter a world entirely foreign to her, where she would be the outsider, the stranger, perhaps even the enemy. "They will not harm you," Dakota said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "You are under the protection of 2 sons of Chief Washakie." The name meant nothing to Abigail, but the assurance in Dakota's voice offered some comfort. As they approached the camp's edge, she straightened her spine, determined to face whatever reception awaited with dignity. People gathered as they entered, men pausing in their work, women emerging from lodges, children peeking around their mothers' skirts with wide, curious eyes. Conversations hushed. All eyes followed their progress toward the center of the camp. Keme dismounted first, helping Takoda down with careful movements that belied the warrior's usual stoicism. The pain of the journey had clearly taken its toll. Abigail slid from her mule, legs stiff from the long ride. An elderly woman emerged from the largest lodge, her silver hair braided with strips of red cloth, her bearing regal despite her advanced years. The crowd parted respectfully as she approached. "Grandmother," Kem said, bowing his head briefly. The old woman's gaze moved from him to Takoda, her weathered face softening with concern as she took in his injuries. She spoke rapidly, her hands moving to gently touch his wounded side. Then, to Abigail's surprise, she turned to face her directly. "So," she said in perfect, unaccented English, "you are the one my grandson saw in his vision." Stunned, Abigail could only nod. The elderly woman smiled, revealing surprisingly strong white teeth. "I am Mapia, mother of their father. Come." She gestured toward her lodge. "There is much to discuss." Inside Mapia's lodge, the air was warm and fragrant with herbs hanging from the center poles. A small fire burned in a central pit, its smoke rising through a carefully adjusted opening at the top. Furs and woven blankets covered the packed earth floor, creating surprisingly comfortable seating. Takoda was eased down onto a bed of furs, his grandmother immediately examining his splintered leg and bandaged side with knowing hands. "Sit," she instructed Abigail, indicating a place opposite the fire. Keme remained standing near the entrance, his expression watchful, but no longer openly suspicious. Outside, murmured conversations had resumed, though Abigail could feel the camp's collective curiosity pressing against the lodge walls. "You set the bone well," Mapia said, inspecting Abigail's handiwork on Takoda's leg. "Where did you learn this?" "My brother taught me some," Abigail replied. "He learned from our father, who was a doctor in Philadelphia." "Ah, a medicine man." Mapia nodded approvingly. "And the wound?" She carefully unwrapped the bandage on Takoda's side. "I cleaned it as best I could with what I had. He used some of his own medicine as well, plants from his pouch." Mapia examined the healing wound, her fingers gentle but thorough. "Red Dock and yarrow, good choices." She looked up at Takoda. "You were lucky this woman found you." "Not luck," Takoda replied. "Vision showed path." The old woman's eyes crinkled. "Perhaps, perhaps not. The spirits have their own reasons." She rewrapped the wound with fresh cloth from a nearby basket. "You will heal, grandson, but the leg needs proper setting." The white woman's work was good, but not perfect. Despite the criticism, her tone held no malice. Abigail found herself respecting the old woman's straightforward assessment. "I did what I could with limited supplies." "Of course you did," Mapia replied, "and my grandson lives because of it." She turned to Keme. "Bring Helaku. We will need his strength to reset the bone." As Keme ducked out of the lodge, Mapia settled herself beside Abigail. "Now tell me," she said, her black eyes sharp with intelligence, "what brings a white woman alone to the frontier? Where is your husband, your family?" The directness of the questions startled Abigail, but something in the old woman's manner invited honesty. "My parents died of fever in Philadelphia. My brother Thomas brought me west last year, but he died this past autumn. I was trying to keep his homestead going, alone." Mapia's tone suggested this was either very brave or very foolish. "I had little choice," Abigail replied. "I had nowhere else to go. And now you come here, among people your kind call enemies." It wasn't a question, but Abigail answered anyway. "The real enemy is ignorance, I think, and fear." Mapia's weathered face broke into an unexpected smile. "Well said." She studied Abigail for a long moment. "My grandson believes the spirit sent you to him, that your face appeared in his vision quest 5 days before you pulled him from the ice." so he told. "Me," Abigail said carefully. "I don't know what to make of such things." "No." The old woman's eyes twinkled. "And yet you risked your standing among your own people to help him, to come here. Why?" The question struck at the heart of Abigail's own confusion. Why had she made such a momentous decision? Was it simply that returning to her lonely homestead seemed unbearable after the intensity of the past week? Or was there something more? Some pull toward this man whose life she had saved, toward a different kind of existence? "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "It felt right." Mapia nodded, as if this answer satisfied her. The head often follows where the heart has already decided to go. Before Abigail could respond, the lodge flap opened. Keme entered, followed by an enormous man whose broad shoulders nearly touched both sides of the entrance. Despite his intimidating size, the newcomer's face was gentle, his movements careful as he knelt beside Takoda. "Helaku," Mapia said by way of introduction, "our strongest arm, but softest heart." The big man nodded respectfully to Abigail, then turned his attention to Takoda's leg. What followed was an ordeal that tested everyone's endurance. Resetting the bone properly required breaking through the partial healing that had already occurred. Takoda refused any numbing medicine, insisting he needed to feel when the bone was correctly aligned. Abigail held his hand throughout the procedure, admiring his stoicism even as his grip threatened to crush her fingers. Helaku worked with surprising delicacy, his massive hands somehow gentle as they manipulated the damaged limb. When the bone finally slipped back into proper alignment with an audible click, Takoda's entire body relaxed, sweat pouring from his brow. "Now it will heal straight," Mapia said with satisfaction. "Helaku, bring my special poultice, the one with bear fat and white willow bark." As the big man ducked out, Keme stepped forward. "The council wishes to speak with you, grandmother, about the white woman's presence." His tone was respectful but firm. Mapia waved a dismissive hand. "The council can wait until my grandson is properly tended." "They are concerned," Keme persisted. "The soldiers who seek us, they will come looking for her too now." The observation hung in the air, its implications clear. Abigail's presence might endanger the entire camp. "Let them come," Takoda said suddenly, his voice strained but resolute. "She is under my protection." Keme's expression softened slightly as he looked at his brother. "Your protection means little, while you cannot even stand, brother." "Then she is under mine," Mapia declared, her tone brooking no argument. "Tell the council I will speak with them when the sun touches the western peaks. Not before." After Keme left, Helaku returned with the medicinal poultice. The smell was pungent but not unpleasant, earthy and medicinal. Mapia applied it liberally to Takoda's leg, then wrapped it with strips of soft deerskin. "Rest now," she told her grandson. 2. Abigail, come. You should eat, and I will show you where you can wash away the journey's dust. Outside, the camp had settled into its midday rhythms. Children played between the lodges, women worked at various tasks, men repaired tools or tended horses. Many paused to watch as Mapia led Abigail through the camp, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open distrust. "They will accept you in time," Mapia said, "if you prove worthy of acceptance." "And how do I do that?" Abigail asked. "By being useful, by respecting our ways without losing yourself, by understanding that a guest becomes family only when they contribute to the circle." The old woman gestured around the camp. "Everyone here has a purpose, a role. You must find yours." They stopped at a small stream that ran behind the lodges. The water was cold and clear, offering welcome refreshment after days of travel. As Abigail washed her face and hands, Mapia waited patiently, her eyes scanning the distant ridgelines. "Your people will come looking," she said finally. "The soldiers. Perhaps others from your settlement." "Perhaps," Abigail agreed. drying her. Ends on her skirt, though I doubt anyone would miss me much. I kept mostly to myself after Thomas died. Nevertheless, they will see your absence as our doing, another grievance against us." Mapia's expression was thoughtful. "The young lieutenant, the one who found you with my grandson, will report what happened?" "I believe so. He seemed an honorable man, despite his prejudices. Honorable men can still do dishonorable things when ordered by those they serve." Mapia sighed. "Come, let us eat, and then you must meet the council." The meal was simple but satisfying. A rich stew of venison and wild roots, served with flat bread that reminded Abigail of the journey cakes her mother used to make. They ate in Mapia's lodge, where Takoda had fallen into an exhausted sleep. Kema joined them briefly, his manner more relaxed now that they were among their people. "The men you encountered at the cabin?" Abigail asked him as they ate. "The trappers! Did they truly attack your women first?" Kem's face darkened. 3 moons ago, small hunting party, women gathering winter stores, few warriors for protection. Trappers wanted furs, food. When refused, they took by force. Killed. 2 women, wounded others." His hand tightened around his bowl. "We tracked them. Justice was done." "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly. "Such things, they happen on both sides." "Both sides are not the same," Kemi replied, though without anger. "Your people take our land, push us into smaller territories, kill game we need to survive, then call us savages when we defend what remains." There was painful truth in his words that Abigail couldn't deny. "Not all settlers think that way," she offered. "Some seek peaceful coexistence." "Some," Kim acknowledged. "Too few." He set down his empty bowl and rose. "Council gathers. They wait for you and grandmother." The council meeting took place in the largest lodge at the camp's center. 8 men sat in a semicircle, all elders except for Kim, who took his place among them with the obvious deference of a younger leader. Mapia entered with dignified poise, Abigail following close behind, intensely aware of the scrutiny directed her way. The eldest of the council, a man whose deeply lined face suggested at least 80 winters, spoke first in Shoshone. Though Abigail couldn't understand the words, the skeptical tone was unmistakable. Mapia responded calmly, occasionally gesturing, and toward Abigail. She seemed to be recounting the story of Takoda's rescue and the subsequent confrontation with the soldiers. The council listened attentively, their expressions giving little away. When she finished, another elder spoke, his question directed toward Abigail. Mapia translated, "He asks why you chose to come with us rather than return to your people." All eyes fixed on her, waiting. Abigail took a deep breath, suddenly understanding that her answer might determine not just her welcome here, but perhaps her very survival. "I chose to follow a path that felt true," she said slowly, giving Mapia time to translate. "My life among the settlers was one of isolation and suspicion since my brother's death. When I pulled Takoda from the river, when I tended his wounds, I found purpose again." She paused, searching for words that would bridge the vast cultural divide. "I believe we are not meant to walk alone in this world. Sometimes we must follow unexpected trails to find where we truly belong." As Mapia translated, the council members exchanged glances. The eldest spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "He says pretty words are easy," Mapia translated. "Actions prove the heart's truth." Another council member, somewhat younger, with a scar running from temple to jaw, leaned forward. His question was sharp, challenging. "He asks what skills you bring," Mapia said, "how you will contribute to our people's survival." Abigail considered carefully. "I can read and write in English, which might be useful in understanding the settlers' intentions. I have some skill with medicine, as Takoda's recovery shows. I can sew, cook, tend gardens." She straightened her shoulders. "And I'm willing to learn whatever else is needed." The scarred warrior seemed unimpressed, firing off another question. "He asks if you would take up weapons against your own kind should they attack us," Mapia said, her expression revealing nothing of her own thoughts. On this difficult question, the lodge fell utterly silent, waiting. Abigail felt the weight of 8 pairs of eyes upon her. The question cut to the heart of her decision to come here. Would she truly sever all ties with her former life? Could she stand against people she once called neighbors? If it came to that, "I would defend those who have shown me kindness," she said finally. "But I would hope my presence might help prevent such a choice becoming necessary." She met the scarred warrior's gaze directly. "I stand between 2 worlds now. Perhaps I can help build understanding where there has been only fear." As Mapia translated, the eldest council member nodded slowly. He spoke at length, his tone measured. The other council members listened with evident respect. "Chief Running Elk says you may stay through the winter," Mapia translated when he finished, "until Takoda is healed. Your actions during this time will determine if you may remain longer." She added with a hint of pride, "He also says any woman brave enough to defy both soldiers and snowstorm to save a stranger deserves the chance to prove her worth." Relief washed through Abigail. She bowed her head respectfully to the chief. "Thank you. I will not waste this opportunity." As the council dispersed, Keme approached her. "You spoke well," he said, surprising her with the compliment, "but winter here is hard, different from white settlements. Are you certain of your choice?" In truth, Abigail wasn't certain of anything except that returning to her lonely cabin held no appeal. But as she looked around at the Shoshone camp, at the children playing, the women working together, the sense of community that permeated even the simplest tasks, she felt something she hadn't experienced since before her parents. Death's belonging. "I'm certain I need to try," she answered honestly. Keme's usual stoicism softened momentarily. "Then welcome to our circle, Abigail Harmon." He glanced toward Mapia's lodge, where Takoda rested. "My brother saw truly in his vision. You are not what we expected." As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across the valley, Abigail stood at the edge of the camp, gazing back toward the mountains she had crossed. Somewhere beyond those ridges lay the life she had left behind, the homestead, the small town, the world of settlers pushing ever westward. She had crossed more than physical distance to reach this place. She had traversed a boundary few white women ever approached, let alone crossed. What lay ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time in many months, uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. Mapia joined her silently, her presence comforting in its quiet strength. "The path ahead will not be easy," the old woman said, following Abigail's gaze toward the mountains. "2 worlds touch you now. Such touching brings pain as well as wisdom." "I know," Abigail replied. Mapia nodded. "Satisfied? Good. Clear eyes see farthest." She laid a weathered hand on Abigail's arm. "Come, there is much to learn before darkness falls." Together they turned back toward the circle of lodges, toward the flickering fires and murmuring voices that marked the beginning of evening in the winter camp. Behind them, the last light of day gilded the mountain peaks, transforming them from barriers to bridges between one life and another. Weeks passed. Winter deepened its hold on the valley, transforming the landscape into a realm of crystalline beauty and lethal cold. Within the Shoshone camp, life followed rhythms dictated by seasons older than memory, patterns of survival honed through countless generations. For Abigail, each day brought new lessons. Some were practical, how to scrape and tan a deerskin until it turned butter soft, how to identify medicinal plants preserved through winter, how to weave snowshoes from flexible birch and rawhide. Other lessons were cultural, the intricate relationships between band members, the stories told around evening fires, the ceremonies that marked passages of moon and season. Through it all, Mapia served as her guide and occasional protector. The old woman possessed not only wisdom, but authority that few in the camp would challenge. Under her tutelage, Abigail began to find her place, not fully accepted, but no longer viewed with outright suspicion. Your hands learn quickly, Mapia observed one afternoon as they worked side by side, preparing medicinal tinctures in the warmth of her lodge. Outside, snow fell in lazy spirals, adding another layer to the thick blanket covering the valley. "They've had practice following instruction," Abigail replied, carefully crushing dried elderberry with a stone mortar. "My mother believed idle. Hands invited mischief," Mapia chuckled, the sound rich with appreciation. "Your mother and I would have understood each other, I think." She added a pinch of something pungent to her own mixture. "Tell me of her." Abigail's hands stilled momentarily. She rarely spoke of her parents. The pain of their loss had become a private thing, carried silently. But Mapia's interest seemed genuine, her question an offering rather than an intrusion. "She was born to wealth in Boston," Abigail began, resuming her work. "But she scandalized her family by marrying my father, a doctor with radical ideas and empty pockets. They moved to Philadelphia when I was small." The memories flowed more easily than expected. She was determined, brilliant with numbers, could manage household accounts to the penny, and she had no patience for pretense. "A worthy ancestor," Mapia nodded approvingly. "Our grandmothers shape us, whether we know them or not." Her weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, measuring ingredients with precise pinches. "The tea you're making, it will help Takoda's pain without clouding his mind." Takoda's recovery progressed steadily, if slower than he preferred. His properly reset leg remained immobilized, but he had begun to move about the lodge with the aid of wooden crutches carved by Helaku. The wound in his side had healed to a puckered scar, a permanent reminder of how close death had come. He watched Abigail's integration into camp life with quiet intensity, offering occasional guidance, but more often simply observing. His customary reserve had deepened since their return, as if the vulnerability of his injuries had prompted him to rebuild certain walls. "He fears," Mapia told Abigail one evening when they were alone, "not for himself, but for you." "For me?" Abigail looked up from the moccasin she was learning to construct, surprised by the observation. "His vision showed your face, but not the path beyond. Such uncertainty troubles him." The old woman's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Men believe they must know all outcomes. Women understand that life unfolds as it will." Before Abigail could respond, the lodge flap opened. Kame entered, followed by two warriors returning from a hunting expedition. Their expressions immediately signaled trouble. "Riders," Kemi announced without preamble. "Coming from the east. Soldiers, at least 12, and settlers with them." The news struck Abigail like a physical blow. "How far?" she asked. "2 days' ride if snow holds, less if it clears." Kem's gaze was steady, assessing. "They came to your homestead first, found it empty. Now they follow rumors, asking questions in trading posts." Mapia rose, her authority, filling the space despite her small stature. "Alert the council, prepare the people for possible movement." As the warriors hurried to obey, she turned to Abigail. "Now we see where your loyalties truly lie." The implication was clear. If the soldiers were searching for her, she held information that could either protect or endanger the camp. "They're coming because of me," Abigail acknowledged, "but not to rescue me. Lieutenant Reynolds saw me leave willingly. This is about something else." She thought back to their encounter at the cabin. "It's about making an example." The colonel can't allow a white woman to choose Shoshone over settlers. It undermines everything they believe about your people. Keme's expression darkened. Then they come for war. Not necessarily, Abigail countered. They come to assert control. There's a difference. Not to those who die. Keme left the lodge, purpose in every step. Mapia studied Abigail's face. What would you have us do? The question caught Abigail off guard. Since her arrival she had been the learner, the outsider seeking acceptance. Now suddenly, Mapia was asking her counsel in a matter of life and death. I don't know, she admitted. Running seems wisest, but Takoda can't travel far yet. And a band with elderly children and winter supplies cannot move quickly through deep snow, Mapia added pragmatically. So we must consider other paths. The council gathered swiftly. Unlike the previous meeting where Abigail had stood as supplicant, this time she was called to sit within the circle. 8 faces turned to her expectantly, some suspicious, others merely grave. Chief Running Elk spoke first, his words translated by Mapia. You know these soldiers and their ways. What do they seek? Abigail chose her words carefully, aware that lives might hang on her assessment. They likely have orders to bring me back to the settlement and to punish any Shoshone who interfered with a white woman. The colonel at Fort Bridger is known for his harsh methods of pacification. The scarred warrior, whom Abigail now knew as Black Wolf, spoke sharply. They bring settlers too. Armed men, not soldiers. Why? It was a perceptive question. Abigail had been pondering the same thing. Legitimacy, she said finally. The army works under orders, with rules. If settlers are involved, it becomes a matter of protecting civilians rather than just military action. Chief Running Elk stroked his chin thoughtfully. What would you advise, woman who saves? The name startled her. It was the first time anyone in the camp besides Mapia had addressed her by the Shoshone name she'd been given in recognition of Takoda's rescue. The most direct solution would be for me to leave, she said. Meet them before they reach the camp. If I go willingly, perhaps they'll have no cause to come further. No. The voice came from the lodge entrance. Takoda stood there, supported by his crutches, his face etched with determination. They will use you to find us, then attack anyway. Keme nodded agreement. My brother speaks the truth. Once they have you, we lose all advantage. Then we must talk to them, Abigail insisted. Find terms all can accept. Black Wolf's laugh was bitter. Talk? When have white men honored words to our people? They make treaties, then break them when convenient. Not all are the same, Abigail countered, even as she acknowledged the justice in his assessment. History had given the Shoshone little reason to trust such negotiations. Chief Running Elk raised his hand for silence. Woman who saves speaks from hope. Black Wolf from experience. Both have wisdom. His age-creased eyes settled on Abigail. But this I ask, if talking fails, if they demand you return and threaten our people, what then? The lodge fell silent, all eyes on her. It was the question she had been avoiding since hearing of the approaching force, the ultimate test of where her loyalties now resided. I will not go with them, she said, her voice steadier than she expected. This is my home now. These are my people. The words felt right as she spoke them, crystallizing a truth she had been approaching for weeks. I will stand with you, whatever comes. A ripple of surprise moved through the council. Even Black Wolf's perpetual scowl softened momentarily. Chief Running Elk nodded, grave but satisfied. Then we prepare, he declared, for talk first, for other paths if needed. The next day passed in tense preparation. The camp didn't evacuate. Such a move would be too slow and leave tracks too obvious, but preparations were made for swift departure if necessary. Essential supplies were packed. The oldest and youngest were assigned to guides who knew secret paths through the mountains, Weapons were readied, but kept from obvious display. Abigail worked alongside the women, her hands busy with practical tasks while her mind raced through possible scenarios. What arguments might persuade Lieutenant Reynolds if he led the approaching force? What evidence of her willing presence might influence the settlers who accompanied the soldiers? As dusk approached, Keme returned from scouting with news. They camp 7 miles east, near the river bend. Will reach us by midday tomorrow. Chief Running Elk called for a final council. Their strategy took shape. A small party would ride out to meet the soldiers before they reached the camp. Chief Running Elk himself, Keem, 2 trusted warriors, Mapia as translator and Abigail. They would attempt negotiation from a position of initial strength, offering peaceful resolution while making clear that force would be met with force. I should go too, Takoda insisted, though he could barely stand without his crutches. You can barely sit a horse, Keme countered. Your presence would show weakness, not strength. Though the words were harsh, the concern behind them was evident. The brothers had grown closer during Takoda's recovery, their usual competitive edge, softened by shared purpose. That night, unable to sleep, Abigail sat by the small fire in Mapia's lodge. The old woman had retired hours earlier, her steady breathing the only sound, besides the occasional pop of burning wood. Abigail's thoughts whirled like snowflakes in a storm. Memories of Philadelphia, of Thomas, of the homestead she'd struggled to maintain after his death. Then newer images. Takoda half frozen in the river, Keme's suspicious eyes when they first met, Mapia's hands guiding hers through unfamiliar tasks. Children in the camp gradually including her in their games. She had crossed a threshold, she realized. The woman who had pulled a wounded warrior from river ice no longer existed. In her place stood someone new, neither fully Shoshone nor any longer fully of the settler world. Whatever happened tomorrow would cement this transformation. The lodge. Flap moved. Takoda entered silently, his crutches making barely a sound on the packed earth floor. He lowered himself carefully beside her, his splinted leg extended toward the fire. "You should rest," he said softly, mindful of his sleeping grandmother. "As should you," she countered. "Your leg needs stillness to heal properly." A hint of his rare smile touched his lips. "You sound like grandmother now." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the fire's dance. Abigail was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the subtle scent of pine and leather that seemed to follow him, the controlled power in his movements despite his injury, the quiet intensity that had drawn her from the first. "I never thanked you," he said finally, "for staying, for choosing this path." "I didn't do it for thanks," she replied. "I know." His dark eyes reflected the firelight. "That is why thanks are deserved." Another silence fell, this one charged with unspoken currents. Since her arrival at the camp, propriety had kept a certain distance between them. Takoda was the chief's grandson, a respected warrior. Abigail remained, despite growing acceptance, an outsider. Their interactions had been limited, observed, circumscribed by custom. Yet now, in the intimate darkness of the lodge, with danger approaching, those boundaries seemed suddenly arbitrary. "Are you afraid?" she asked, the question emerging before she could reconsider it. Takoda didn't immediately answer. When he did, his honesty surprised her. "Yes. Not of fighting or dying. Those are a warrior's paths." He looked directly at her. "I fear for you, for what tomorrow brings." "I meant what I said to the council," Abigail assured him. "I won't go back." "They may not give choice." His hand moved tentatively toward hers, then stopped, hovering in the space between them. "White leaders, they see women as possessions, will not understand your decision. Then they'll learn otherwise." Abigail bridged the remaining distance, her fingers intertwining with his. The contact sent a current of warmth up her arm that had nothing to do with the fire. Dakota's expression softened, the stoic mask slipping, to reveal vulnerability beneath. "In my vision," he said quietly, "you stood at the crossing of rivers. One path led back to your world, one led forward to unknown territory. You chose the forward path." His fingers tightened around hers, but vision did not show what waited there. "Does anyone ever truly know what waits ahead?" Abigail asked. "We make choices, then live with them." "Some choices change everything that follows," he replied. His free hand rose to touch her cheek, a gesture so gentle it might have been imagined. Like pulling a wounded man from a river, Mapia's voice emerged from the shadows, startling them both. "Like falling in love during a time of danger." Abigail pulled back instinctively, embarrassed to be observed in such an intimate moment. But Dakota's hand remained firmly clasped around hers, his expression unapologetic as he faced his grandmother. The gay old woman sat up on her sleeping furs, regarding them with knowing eyes. "Did you think I was truly asleep? At my age, sleep comes in shallow pools, not deep lakes." She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "Besides, old eyes still see what blooms between young hearts." "Grandmother," Dakota began, but she waved. Him silent. "I do not disapprove," she said simply. "The spirits rarely bring souls together without purpose." Her expression grew serious. "But tomorrow brings hard choices. Hearts must not cloud judgment when lives depend on clear minds." The reminder of tomorrow's confrontation sobered them all. Dakota nodded respectfully to his grandmother, then turned back to Abigail. "Whatever comes," he said softly, "know that my vision was a true gift, worth any price paid." He left as quietly as he had arrived, the only evidence of his visit the lingering warmth in Abigail's hand and the knowing gleam in Mapia's eye. "He has never spoken so to any woman," the old woman observed after he had gone. "His heart was closed after his wife died in the fever seasons ago." This was news to Abigail. He was married, briefly. Great love, great sorrow. Since then, duty only. Mapia studied Abigail's face in the firelight, until river ice broke more than his leg. Sleep remained elusive after that revelation. Abigail lay on her furs, staring at the smoke hole above, watching occasional snowflakes drift past the stars. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, perhaps violence. Yet her thoughts kept returning to the touch of Dakota's hand, the unspoken current that had flowed between them. Dawn broke clear and cold, the sky a perfect blue dome above the snow-covered valley. The camp stirred early, tension evident in every face. Children were kept close to the lodges. Warriors checked weapons with methodical precision. Women packed additional supplies, their movements brisk with suppressed anxiety. Abigail dressed with care, choosing a blend of her original clothing and items gifted by the Shoshone women, her own practical wool skirt and blouse, but with added moccasins, a beaded belt, and a beautiful fringed shawl decorated with geometric patterns in blue and red. The outfit reflected her new identity, between worlds, belonging fully to neither yet connected to both. Mapia approved with a nod. "Good. Show them you choose this freely, that you honor both paths that made you." Outside, horses were being prepared for the negotiation party. Chief Running Elk sat astride a magnificent grey stallion, his ceremonial headdress catching the morning light. Ikeme and the two selected warriors, Black Wolf and a younger man named Swift Fox, were already mounted, their expressions grim but resolute. As Abigail approached her own mount, a gentle dun mare she'd been using since arriving at the camp, a figure emerged from the nearest lodge. Dakota, moving awkwardly with his crutches through the snow, came to stand beside her horse. "Return safely," he said simply, though his eyes conveyed much more. "We'll find a peaceful path," she promised, hoping her words held more certainty than she felt. He reached up, pressing something into her hand. A small leather pouch hung on a simple thong. "Protection," he explained, "blessed by grandmother's prayers." Abigail slipped it over her head, tucking it beneath her blouse where it rested, warm against her skin. "Thank you." Around them the camp had gone still, watching this exchange with collective interest. The moment felt weightier than the simple giving of a token, a public acknowledgement of connection that would be understood by all who witnessed it. Mapia mounted her horse with surprising agility for her years, settling beside Chief Running Elk. "Come, daughter," she called to Abigail. "Time runs like spring water." As their small party rode from the camp, Abigail felt the eyes of the entire band upon them, hopes, fears, and prayers following their progress. Takoda stood leaning on his crutches, watching until they disappeared around the bend in the valley. They rode in silence, following the river's course eastward. Snow sparkled in the morning sun, beautiful and blinding. In other circumstances, Abigail might have marveled at the pristine landscape. Now, her every sense strained for the first sign of the approaching soldiers. They reached a natural overlook, a rocky promontory jutting from the valley wall, offering clear views in both directions. Chief Running Elk signaled a halt. "Here," he said through Mapia's translation. "We wait with the advantage of high ground." They dismounted, securing the horses behind the rocks. Black Wolf scouted ahead, returning shortly with news. "They come," he reported. 12 soldiers, 8 settlers, armed. Abigail took a deep breath, steadying herself. In her mind she rehearsed arguments, appeals, explanations, anything that might diffuse the coming confrontation. Her hand, unconsciously, rose to touch the pouch beneath her blouse. Takoda had called it. She hoped its medicine was strong. The riders appeared at the far end of the valley, blue-coated soldiers in formation, civilian riders in heavy winter gear behind them. At their head rode a familiar figure, Lieutenant Reynolds, his posture military straight, his expression unreadable at this distance. Chief Running Elk nodded to Kame, who raised a white cloth attached to a long stick, the universal signal for parley. The approaching column slowed, then halted. After a brief consultation, Lieutenant Reynolds and 2 others, 1 soldier, 1 civilian, detached from the main group and continued forward. "They accept talk," Chief Running Elk observed. "First victory." As the 3 riders drew closer, Abigail recognized the civilian with a start of surprise. It was Everett, the shopkeeper from the settlement, his usually genial face set in lines of grim determination. The third man was unfamiliar, an officer of higher rank than Reynolds, judging by his uniform. They halted their horses a cautious distance away. Lieutenant Reynolds's eyes widened slightly when he spotted Abigail among the Shoshone, but he quickly mastered his expression. "Miss Harmon," he called. "Are you well?" Before Abigail could answer, the senior officer cut in sharply. "Stand aside, savages. The woman returns with us now." Chief Running Elk, understanding the tone, if not the words, straightened to his full, impressive height. "I am Chief Running Elk of the Mountain Band," he said in Shoshone, Mapia translating. "You stand on Shoshone hunting grounds. Why do you come armed to our territory?" The senior officer, a captain, Abigail now noted, barely waited for the translation before responding. "We come for the white woman and for justice against those who murdered American citizens. Stand aside or face the consequences." As Mapia translated, Abigail stepped forward. "Captain," she said firmly, "I am here of my own free will. No one has harmed or coerced me." "Miss Harmon," Everett interjected, his voice pitched with concern, "these redskins have obviously intimidated you. Just come with us, and you'll be safe." "I am perfectly safe where I stand," Abigail replied. and I have no intention of leaving." Lieutenant Reynolds studied her carefully, noting her blended attire, her position among the Shoshone leaders. "You've joined them?" he asked, genuine confusion in his tone. "I've found a place where I'm valued," she said simply. "Something I never had at the settlement after my brother died." The captain's face darkened with anger. "This is absurd. No white woman chooses to live with savages unless coerced." He turned to Reynolds. "She's clearly been broken somehow. We take her by force if necessary." As Mapia translated his words, Black Wolf's hand moved to his knife. Kime tensed, ready for conflict. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Peace or bloodshed hanging on the next word spoken. Abigail stepped forward, placing herself deliberately between the two sides. The captain's hand had already moved to his holstered pistol. Black Wolf's knife gleamed in the winter sun. One wrong move would ignite violence that would spread like wildfire. "Captain," she said firmly, "I understand you have orders, but I am an American citizen making a free choice about where and how I live. There is no law against that." The officer's face flushed with anger. "No white woman in her right mind." "That's quite enough," Abigail cut him off. "My mind is perfectly sound. Ask Lieutenant Reynolds. He witnessed my choice weeks ago." All eyes turned to Reynolds, whose discomfort was evident in his rigid posture. "Sir," he said carefully to his superior, "Miss Harmon did indeed leave willingly with the Shoshone after we encountered them at her cabin." "After they manipulated her," the captain countered. "After they'd isolated her alone in that cabin." "God!" "And knows what they told her." Everett nodded vigorously. "It ain't natural, Miss Harmon. These savages have worked some kind of witchcraft on you." A new voice entered the conversation. Mapia's, speaking directly in English, surprising everyone. "The only witchcraft here is fear," she said, her accent minimal despite her advanced years. "Fear of what you do not understand." The captain's eyes narrowed. "You speak English." "I was educated at the mission school in my youth," Mapia replied with dignity. "I know your language, your Bible, your ways. I chose to return to my people because here I found the truth." She gestured to Abigail, "as has this daughter." Chief Running Elk, sensing the shift in energy, spoke again, Mapia returning to her role as translator. "We seek no conflict. The woman stays because she wishes to stay. This is not cause for bloodshed." The captain was unmoved. "And what of the trappers your warriors murdered? Is that not cause?" Keme stepped forward, his face a controlled mask of anger. "Those men attacked our hunting party first, killed 2 women. Would your law not punish those who murder innocent women?" Everett spat on the ground. "Convenient story." "It's the truth," Abigail insisted. "And if you truly want justice, you would investigate both sides rather than assuming guilt." Lieutenant Reynolds looked increasingly troubled. "Sir," he said to the captain, "perhaps we should consider—" "Enough discussion," the captain interrupted. "Colonel Morrison's orders were clear. We return with the woman and bring these savages to justice." He raised his voice to carry to the main group of soldiers waiting in the distance. "Lieutenant, signal the men to advance." "Wait." Abigail moved closer to the 3 mounted men, hands raised in a placating gesture. "There's another way to resolve this without bloodshed." She turned to Chief Running Elk. "With your permission, I propose a council. Equal numbers. 3 of your leaders, 3 of theirs. We meet on neutral ground to discuss terms that might satisfy both sides." As Mapia translated, the chief considered the suggestion with grave attention. Finally, he nodded. "Wisdom speaks through woman who saves. We accept the counsel." The captain scoffed. "This is absurd. I don't negotiate with—" "Sir," Lieutenant Reynolds interjected with newfound firmness. "With respect, our orders include maintaining peaceful relations where possible. A council might achieve our objectives without risking the lives of our men." Everett looked skeptical, but nodded slowly. "The colonel did say to use discretion, Captain Parker." Captain Parker's jaw worked as he considered his options. The Shoshone had positioned themselves well, with high ground advantage. Any attack would come at a cost, perhaps a significant one. 3 hours, he finally conceded. "We'll meet at the river bend below this position. 3 representatives from each side, plus Miss Harmon." His eyes narrowed. "But know this, if the council fails to reach terms I find acceptable, we will take action." Chief Running Elk received the translation. "With dignity. 3 hours at Riverbend. We will come in peace, but prepared for other paths if needed." As the 3 riders turned back toward their main group, Abigail released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Black Wolf resheathed his knife, but looked dissatisfied. "Words will not satisfy men who thirst for blood," he muttered. "Perhaps not," Chief Running Elk replied, "but they may buy time, and in winter time favors those who know the land best." They returned to camp with the news. A mixed reaction greeted them. Relief that immediate violence had been averted, skepticism that talking would resolve anything, preparation for possible conflict nonetheless. Takoda met them at the edge of camp, his face tense with concern until he saw Abigail riding safely among them. As she dismounted, he moved to her side as quickly as his injured leg allowed. "They wanted to take you by force," he said. "Not a question, but a statement." "Yes," she confirmed, "but we've arranged a council instead. 3 hours from now." His expression darkened. Captain with yellow stripes, his face showed no respect, only anger. "You saw?" Abigail asked, surprised. Takoda gestured toward a young warrior who had appeared silently beside him. Swift Runner watched from a hidden place, described everything. His hand moved briefly to touch the pouch he'd given her, now hanging visibly over her blouse. Protection worked, no blood spilled. "Yet," Black Wolf added grimly as he passed them, leading his horse toward the corral. Inside Mapia's lodge, Chief Running Elk convened a smaller council to decide their approach. "Who speaks for us?" he asked. "I must be one voice. Who else?" "Keme," Mapia suggested immediately. "He is diplomatic when needed, forceful when required." The chief nodded approval. "And third voice?" "Woman who saves," Takoda said firmly. All eyes turned to him in surprise. He continued, undeterred. "She understands both worlds, can translate meanings beyond just words." Chief Running Elk considered this with a thoughtful frown. "She is not an elder or leader, but she is a bridge," Mapia pointed out. "And her presence shows the truth of our claim, that she chooses freely to stay." After further discussion, they agreed. Abigail would join Chief Running Elk and Kame at the council, with Mapia attending as translator. The remainder of the 3 hours was spent in careful preparation, not just of arguments and positions, but of defensive measures in case the council was merely a delaying tactic for a planned attack. Warriors positioned themselves discreetly in the hills surrounding the meeting place. Families packed essentials, ready to flee along predetermined escape routes if necessary. Weapons were distributed, ammunition counted, strategies reviewed. As the appointed time approached, Abigail found herself alone with Takoda for a brief moment. He had insisted on coming as far as the camp's edge, though he would not attend the council itself. "If they try to take you," he said quietly, "fight. Others will come." "I hope it won't come to that," she replied, adjusting her shawl. Against the bitter cold, the lieutenant seemed reasonable. He might influence the captain. Takoda's expression remained skeptical. Men with power rarely listen to those beneath them. "Then we must make them listen." She hesitated, then added, "I meant what I said before. I won't go back. This is my home now." The next words came unbidden. "You are my home now." His eyes widened slightly, his customary reserve softening. For a moment, they stood suspended in shared understanding. Too many words to say, too little. Time to say them. Then Kame approached, signaling it was time to depart. "Return to me," Dakota said simply. "I will," she promised. The river bend chosen for the council was a natural meeting ground, a flat, open area where the frozen sweet water curved gently around a grove of bare cottonwoods. As Abigail arrived with the Shoshone delegation, she saw the army representatives already waiting. Captain Parker, Lieutenant Reynolds, and to her surprise, a third man in civilian clothes she didn't recognize. Both parties had brought small contingents who remained at a respectful distance. A show, of force without direct intimidation. The tension in the air was palpable. Breath steaming in the cold air, hands never far from weapons. Chief Running Elk dismounted with dignity, his weathered face impassive beneath his ceremonial headdress. Keme followed, his movements fluid despite the cold. Mapia and Abigail completed their group. Captain Parker waited stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with the formality of the proceedings. Lieutenant Reynolds stood at parade rest, his expression guarded, but not hostile. The unknown civilian was older, perhaps 60, with a trimmed white beard and the bearing of a man accustomed to authority. "Miss Harmon," the older man greeted. His voice cultured and measured. "I'm Judge William Hollister from Fort Bridger. I've been asked to observe these proceedings in an official capacity." The presence of a judge was unexpected. Abigail glanced at Lieutenant Reynolds, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. He had arranged this, she realized, perhaps to ensure some measure of impartiality. "Judge Hollister," she acknowledged with a polite nod. "Thank you for coming." Following Shoshone custom, Chief Running Elk had brought a small bundle of tobacco as a gesture of peaceful intent. He offered it now, Mapia explaining the significance. The judge accepted it with appropriate gravity, though Captain Parker looked as if he were enduring an unpleasant duty. A small fire was kindled in the center of their circle, more symbolic than practical in the bright winter afternoon. When all were seated on blankets spread over the snow, the council began. Chief Running Elk spoke first, as was his right as the eldest present. Through Mapia, he outlined the basic position of his people. Abigail had saved Dakota's life and had subsequently chosen to join their band. She was under their protection by choice, not coercion. The matter of the trappers was separate, a case of retaliation for prior attacks that had left Shoshone women dead. Captain Parker responded with the Army's position. Abigail's decision was considered suspect, potentially made under duress. The trappers' deaths required justice, according to American law, and perhaps most significantly, allowing a white woman to go native would set a dangerous precedent that might undermine the entire reservation system the government was establishing. The judge listened to both sides attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. His demeanor remained neutral, though Abigail thought she detected sympathy in his eyes when she confirmed her desire to stay with the Shoshone. "Miss Harmon," he asked at one point, "are you aware that your decision has legal implications? That you might forfeit your property rights, your protection under American law?" "I am," she replied steadily, "but I've found something more valuable. A community, purpose, belonging." She gestured to the Shoshone leaders. "These people took me in when I had nothing. They've taught me their ways without forcing me to abandon my own. That's more than I can say for many in the settlement." Lieutenant Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "The colonel won't accept this," he murmured to the judge. "He'll see it as capitulation." Judge Hollister stroked his beard thoughtfully. "The law does not expressly forbid a citizen from choosing to live among Indian peoples," he observed, "unusual as it may be for a woman of Miss Harmon's background." "It sets a dangerous precedent," Captain Parker insisted. Keme leaned forward, his composure unwavering despite the captain's hostility. Through Mapia, he made a bold proposal. Perhaps a compromise. Woman who saves stays with our people as she wishes. In return, we agree to regular meetings with army representatives to address any conflicts peacefully before they escalate to violence. Judge Hollister's eyebrows rose. That's a remarkably reasonable suggestion, Captain Parker scoffed. And what of the murdered trappers? Do we simply forget that crime? Chief Running Elk's reply, as translated by Mapia, carried the weight of ancient justice. We propose truth-speaking. Witnesses from both sides tell what happened, first attack, then response. Judge decides fair punishment for all who broke. Peace, whether white or Shoshone. The proposal hung in the air, radical in its simplicity and fairness. The judge looked intrigued, Lieutenant Reynolds cautiously supportive. Captain Parker remained skeptical, but Abigail could see he was calculating the political advantages of a peaceful resolution versus a potentially costly confrontation. There is precedent for such an approach, Judge Hollister noted. In the Dakota Territory, a similar council prevented what might have been a significant conflict 2 years ago. The negotiations continued for another hour, each side giving ground. Incrementally, the temperature dropped as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, but no one suggested adjourning. Too much hung in the balance. Finally, Judge Hollister summarized the terms they had painstakingly constructed. Abigail would remain with the Shoshone as she wished, with the legal right to visit the settlement when needed. An inquiry would be conducted into the trappers' deaths, considering the initial attacks on the Shoshone hunting party. Regular peace councils would be established between army representatives and Shoshone leaders to address grievances before they escalated. These terms seem fair, the judge concluded, and within my authority to endorse. Captain? Captain Parker's lips pressed into a thin line. The colonel may override this, he warned. Perhaps, Judge Hollister acknowledged, but I will personally present these terms to him with my recommendation, and I believe Lieutenant Reynolds will support the wisdom of avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. Reynolds nodded firmly. Yes, Your Honor. Completely. Chief Running Elk studied the captain's reluctant face. Man with stars on shoulder. Your colonel. He seeks victory or peace. After Mapia translated, Captain Parker hesitated. Victory through peace, I suppose he'd say. The chief nodded sagely. Then give him both. Tell him Shoshone agreed to terms. Army got what it wanted without losing a single man. Many victories in one. The simple political wisdom of this approach seemed to register with the captain. His rigid posture relaxed slightly. I'll present it that way, he conceded. As they prepared to formalize the agreement, a commotion erupted from the tree line. A Shoshone scout raced toward them, his expression urgent. Simultaneously, one of the soldiers approached the captain, pointing back toward their main force. What is it? Abigail asked Kim, who had risen to meet the scout. His face darkened as he received the news. More riders coming. Not soldiers, settlers. He turned to Captain Parker accusingly. You planned this? Talk while others come to attack? The captain looked genuinely confused. I don't know what you're talking about. Lieutenant Reynolds had received the report from his soldier. Sir, it's Mackey and his men from Silver Creek. At least 20 armed riders heading this way. They're not under our command. Judge Hollister's expression grew grave. Barton Mackey? The mining operator? What's he doing here? Everett, who had remained with the soldier contingent, approached the council circle. Folks in town got word about Miss Harmon, he explained. Mackey stirred them up, said the army was being too soft on Indians. They're coming to handle things themselves. The fragile peace they'd constructed was unraveling before their eyes. Chief Running Elk turned to his people, issuing rapid instructions. Warriors who had been watching from concealed positions began to emerge, weapons ready. This council is over, Captain Parker declared, rising to his feet. We need to establish control before Mackey's men arrive. Wait! Abigail pleaded. "We had an agreement threatened by circumstances beyond our control." The captain cut her off. Judge Hollister stood with surprising agility for his age. "Captain, I strongly urge you to intercept Mackey and his men. Make it clear. They have no legal authority here. With all due respect, Your Honor, my first duty is to prevent a massacre on either side." Parker turned to his lieutenant. "Reynolds, get our men in position between the approaching settlers and the Shoshone camp. No one fires without my direct order." It was, Abigail realized, a surprisingly reasonable response. The captain was positioning his forces to prevent conflict rather than join it. Perhaps the council had made more impression than she'd thought. Chief Running Elk placed a hand on Abigail's shoulder. "We return to camp. Prepare for whatever comes." The careful diplomacy of the past hours dissolved into urgent action. Both parties mounted quickly. The fragile trust they'd established strained, but not yet broken. As they prepared to depart in opposite directions, Lieutenant Reynolds approached Abigail. "Miss Harmon," he said quietly, "I'll do what I can to control Mackey's men, but they're civilians, not under military discipline. If fighting starts—" He hesitated. "Stay with the women and children, away from the front lines." "I won't hide. While others fight for my right to choose my own path," she replied firmly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I didn't truly expect you would." He saluted her, a gesture of respect between equals, then turned to rejoin his men. The ride back to the Shoshone camp was swift and tense. Scouts raced ahead to spread the warning, while warriors fanned out to secure the perimeter. By the time they arrived, the camp was already in defensive preparation, weapons distributed, non-combatants gathering essentials, escape routes being cleared. Dakota met them at the edge of camp, his face tight with concern. "What happened?" Kemi explained quickly as they dismounted. "Settlers come, many men with guns. Army tries to stop them, but—" He shrugged, the gesture eloquently conveying his skepticism about the military's willingness to stand against their own kind. Chief Running Elk called for the warriors to gather. Despite his advanced years, he stood tall, his voice carrying across the assembly. "We have faced such days before," he reminded them. "We will face them with courage, as our ancestors did. But we fight only if attacked. The army stands between us and these angry settlers. Let them prove their words have meaning." Dakota moved to Abigail's side, his crutches forgotten as he leaned on a hastily acquired rifle instead. "You should go with grandmother and the children," he said, though. His tone suggested he already knew her answer. "No." She checked the pistol she'd carried since pulling him from the river, a simple weapon, but one she knew how to use. Thomas had insisted she learn. "I won't hide. This fight began with me. I'll see it through." Pride and fear warred in his expression. "Then stay near me," he said simply. Mapia approached, her ancient face serene despite the chaos around them. "The spirits are restless today," she observed. "They circle above us, watching to see who remembers their teachings." She laid gnarled hands on both their shoulders. "Remember this. True strength lies not in violence, but in the courage to stand for what is right, even when the path is dangerous." The wisdom in her words cut through the tension, reminding Abigail of what truly mattered. This wasn't just about her choice to stay with the Shoshone. It was about challenging the belief that different peoples couldn't coexist, couldn't learn from each other, couldn't form bonds across the artificial boundaries of race and culture. From the eastern ridge came the pounding of hooves, many horses, approaching fast. Shoshone scouts raced back with reports. The settlers had bypassed the soldiers somehow, using a hidden ravine. They were heading directly for the camp, at least 20 men armed with rifles and pistols. "Positions!" Kem shouted. Warriors scrambled to defensive locations, behind rocks, within lodges. Among the trees that bordered the camp, Abigail and Dakota took cover behind a large boulder at the camp's edge, her pistol ready, his rifle braced against the stone. His injured leg made standing difficult, but from this position he could shoot, effectively while partially protected. "Whatever happens," he said, eyes fixed on the eastern approach, "know that my vision was true. Your face was a gift from spirits, showing the path my heart needed to follow." She wanted to respond, but the moment was cut short by the first riders appearing over the ridge. Unlike the disciplined approach of the soldiers earlier, these men rode hard and wild, some already firing shots into the air, whooping like they were on a drunken hunt, rather than approaching a populated camp. In the lead rode a barrel-chested man with a bushy black beard. Mackie, Abigail presumed. He carried a shotgun in one hand, reins in the other, his face flushed with either excitement or whiskey. "There they are, boys," he shouted. "Let's show these savages what happens when they steal white women." Before they could charge all the way into camp, a line of blue-coated soldiers appeared on horseback, forming a barrier between the settlers and the Shoshone. Lieutenant Reynolds rode at their center, Captain Parker beside him. "That's far enough, Mackie," the captain called out. "This is a military matter now. Turn around and head back to Silver Creek." Mackie reined his horse to a stop, his men bunching behind him in a disorganized crowd. "Since when does the U.S. Army protect Redskins against its own citizens?" he demanded. "Since those citizens decided to take the law into their own hands," Captain Parker replied firmly. "There's been a formal agreement reached with the Shoshone leadership. Judge Hollister himself has endorsed it." This news seemed to give some of the settlers pause, but Mackie was undeterred. "Agreement? What kind of agreement lets savages keep a white woman captive?" "I am not captive," Abigail shouted, standing from behind the boulder, despite Dakota's attempt to pull her back. "I chose to be here." All eyes turned toward her, some surprised, others skeptical, a few openly hostile. She took a deliberate step forward, making sure they could see her clearly. "My name is Abigail Harmon," she called out. "I was alone after my brother died. These people took me in when I had nothing. They showed me kindness when settlers showed only indifference." Her voice gained strength as she continued. "I stay by choice. And any man who thinks he can force me to leave will answer to both Shoshone justice and American law." A murmur ran through the settlers. Some looked confused, others unconvinced. Mackie spat on the ground. "Brainwashed," he declared, "or bewitched. Either way, she's coming with us." He raised his shotgun. In that same instant, three things happened simultaneously. Lieutenant Reynolds drew his pistol, Dakota raised his rifle, and Judge Hollister rode forward from where he had been waiting with the military contingent. "Lower your weapon, Mr. Mackie," the judge commanded, his authoritative voice cutting through the tension, "unless you wish to add assaulting a federal judge to your growing list of potential charges." The confrontation balanced on a knife's edge. Behind Mackie, his men shifted uneasily, some already reconsidering the wisdom of their impulsive action. Behind Abigail, the Shoshone warriors held their positions, arrows nocked, rifles aimed, waiting for either attack or retreat. In that frozen moment, with violence a hair's breadth away, Abigail realized that the next words spoken might determine not just her fate, but the future of relations between these two peoples in this contested valley. She stepped forward again, placing herself deliberately in the open ground between the opposing forces. "Look at me," she said, addressing both sides now. "Really look. I stand between worlds by choice, because I've seen the humanity in both." She turned to face the settlers. Directly, "The same sun warms us all, the same winter tests us, the same hopes for our children guide us. Why must we be enemies when we could learn from each other instead?" For a heartbeat no one moved or spoke. Then, unexpectedly, one of the settlers, an older man toward the back of their group, lowered his rifle. "The woman speaks sense," he said loudly. "I didn't ride out here to shoot at folks who ain't shooting at me." He turned his horse. "I'm heading back to town." His departure created a ripple effect. Two more settlers followed, then another pair. Mackey's face contorted with rage. "Cowards!" he shouted after them. "You'd let them win?" "Ain't about winning," the old settler called back. "It's about living to see tomorrow. And I got crops to plant come spring." The practical wisdom of this statement seemed to resonate with others. The unified front of angry settlers began to dissolve, men peeling away individually or in small groups until only Mackey and his most devoted followers, perhaps 7 men, remained. Captain Parker seized the moment. "Mr. Mackey, you're facing a superior force with an official army backup. I suggest you reconsider your position." Mackey's eyes darted between the soldiers, the departing settlers, and the Shoshone warriors, whose weapons remained trained on him. Calculation replaced rage in his expression as he realized how the odds had shifted. "This ain't over," he growled, lowering his shotgun reluctantly. "Not by a long shot." But he turned his horse nonetheless, jerking the reins viciously as he led his remaining men back the way they had come. As they retreated over the ridge, a collective exhale seemed to pass through both the soldiers and the Shoshone. "Lieutenant." Reynolds holstered his pistol. Keamy lowered his bow. The immediate danger had passed. Judge Hollister approached Abigail, respect evident in his weathered face. "That," he said quietly, "was either the bravest or the most foolhardy thing I've ever witnessed." A smile creased his features. "Perhaps both. Sometimes the most dangerous position is the only one worth taking," she replied. The judge nodded thoughtfully. "I believe our agreement still stands, despite this interruption. I'll make sure Colonel Morrison understands the full situation." He glanced toward where Dakota had come to stand beside Abigail, his rifle now lowered but his presence protective. "Your people have shown remarkable restraint today, young man. That counts for much in my report." As the soldiers prepared to depart, Lieutenant Reynolds approached one last time. "Miss Harmon," he said formally, "I wish you well on your chosen path." He hesitated, then added, "If you ever need assistance, ask for me at Fort Bridger." "Thank you, Lieutenant," she replied, "for understanding even when you didn't agree." He saluted again, this time including Dakota in the gesture, then rejoined his men. Within minutes, the military contingent had departed, following the retreating settlers at a measured distance. The Shoshone camp erupted in activity, warriors returning to their families, weapons being secured, tension gradually yielding to relieved conversation. Chief Running Elk approached with Mapia, their faces reflecting cautious optimism. "The storm passes," the chief observed, "but clouds remain on the horizon." "Mackey and men like him will not forget," Keme agreed. "But for now, we have peace." As the activity swirled around them, Dakota turned to Abigail, his dark eyes reflecting the dying light of the winter afternoon. "You stood between worlds," he said softly, "spoke with a heart that bridges both." "I spoke the truth," she replied simply. "As I saw it." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining with quiet certainty. "My vision showed your face," he reminded her, "but not this courage, not this strength." A rare smile transformed his features. "Spirits give a glimpse of path, but journey reveals true gifts." Around them, the camp was settling back into its rhythms, fires being rekindled, meals prepared, children emerging from hiding places to play once more in the snow. The crisis had passed, yet Abigail knew challenges remained. Mackey would return. The uneasy peace with the military could fracture. The path she had chosen would never be entirely smooth. But as the sun dipped behind the western mountains, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of gold and rose, she felt a certainty that transcended these concerns. She had found not just a place to belong, but a purpose that bridged divided worlds. In saving Dakota from the river ice, she had in turn been saved from a life of isolation and emptiness. Mapia approached, her ancient eyes knowing as she observed their clasped hands. "When spirits show a face in vision," she said with quiet, "wisdom They do not promise an easy path, only necessary one. Abigail nodded, understanding flowing between them. The necessary path is rarely the easy one. But often, Dakota added softly, it is the one most worth walking. As darkness fell across the valley, stars appearing one by one in the clear winter sky, Abigail recognized the truth in those words. The journey ahead would have its challenges, its moments of doubt and difficulty. But some paths, once revealed, could never be abandoned, not without abandoning the truest part of oneself along with them. She had crossed the ice, and found on the other side the home her heart had always sought. Spring came to the valley with the subtle persistence of nature's rhythm. Snow retreated up the mountainsides in gradual stages, revealing patches of earth that greened almost overnight. The frozen river broke apart with thunderous cracks, ice, flows tumbling downstream in a final exodus of winter's grip. Birds returned from southern journeys, their songs filling the dawn with proclamations of territory and courtship. 3 moons had passed since the confrontation with Mackie and his men. The uneasy peace established that day had held, though not without moments of tension. Twice, small parties of settlers had approached the camp's boundaries, ostensibly hunting but clearly scouting. Each time, Shoshone warriors had shadowed them until they departed, no words exchanged, no incidents provoked. Lieutenant Reynolds had visited once, accompanied by 2 soldiers, bringing formal documentation of the agreement Judge Hollister had helped negotiate. Colonel Morrison had reluctantly approved the terms, though his accompanying note made clear he considered the arrangement temporary. Still, it was official recognition. Abigail had the right to remain with the Shoshone, and the band had promises of military intervention if settlers attempted vigilante actions. For Abigail, the passing seasons had brought transformation more profound than the changing landscape. She moved through the camp now with the confidence of belonging, her days filled with purpose, her place in the community no longer questioned. She had learned enough Shoshone to communicate without Mapia's translation, though complex discussions still required assistance. Her hands had mastered tasks that once seemed impossibly foreign, tanning hides with brain solution, constructing watertight baskets, preparing pemmican that would sustain the band during lean times. Most significantly, her relationship with Dakota had deepened through the winter months. As his leg healed and strength returned, they had spent hours together, at first with Mapia as chaperone, later with the tacit approval of the community that recognized the bond forming between them. They spoke of their pasts, of dreams shaped by different cultures, yet surprisingly aligned in core values. They shared stories beneath starlit skies, discovering common ground in their reverence for the natural world, their belief in personal honor, their desire for a future where understanding might replace fear between their peoples. Now, as spring flowers dotted the valley meadows, the band prepared for the seasonal migration to summer hunting grounds. The winter camp was being dismantled methodically, lodges collapsed and bundled, possessions sorted and packed, horses readied for the journey ahead. Abigail worked alongside the women, helping to load a travois with Mapia's medicine bundles. The old woman supervised with sharp-eyed attention, despite her advanced years still insisting on precise arrangement of her precious herbs and tinctures. "These roots must stay dry," she instructed, pointing to a carefully wrapped package. "Place them on top, away from water skins." As Abigail complied, a young girl ran up to them, her face alight with excitement. "Riders coming!" she announced breathlessly. "From the east path!" The news spread through the camp like wind through grass. Warriors paused in their packing, reaching instinctively for weapons. Kem, now officially recognized as war chief, following. His leadership during the winter confrontation moved toward the eastern perimeter, gesturing for his most trusted men to join him. Takoda appeared at Abigail's side, his limp barely noticeable now, except after long days of exertion. The broken leg had healed strong, though Mapia warned it would always ache before storms. A useful skill for a hunter, she had noted pragmatically. "How many?" he asked the child. "3," she replied. "2 blue coats and a woman." This unexpected detail caught everyone's attention. A woman riding with soldiers was unusual enough to temper immediate alarm with curiosity. Abigail shaded her eyes, peering toward the ridge where the eastern trail descended into their valley. Sure enough, 3 riders had appeared, 2 in the unmistakable blue uniforms of the army, the third in a dark riding habit that marked her as definitely female, even at this distance. Lieutenant Reynolds, Takoda identified the lead rider. His eyesight sharper than most. Other soldier not known, woman. He squinted. Cannot see clearly. Whatever they want, we face it together, Abigail said, her hand finding his briefly before they moved to join Keme at the camp's edge. The riders approached at a deliberate pace, clearly intent on appearing non-threatening. As they drew closer, Abigail recognized Lieutenant Reynolds, who raised his hand in greeting. The second soldier was young, probably a new recruit, but it was the woman who captured Abigail's attention. Something about her posture, the way she held herself in the saddle, struck a chord of familiarity. When the party was perhaps 50 yards away, the woman suddenly urged her horse forward, breaking from the military escort to ride ahead. As she drew closer, her features became clear. Abigail gasped, hand flying to her mouth in shock. "Rebecca!" The woman reined her horse to a stop, her face, so like Abigail's own but framed by darker hair, breaking into a smile of relief and disbelief. "Abby! Oh, thank God!" Rebecca Harmon, Abigail's younger sister, whom she hadn't seen since leaving Philadelphia more than a year ago, dismounted with the awkward haste of someone unaccustomed to horseback. For a moment, the sisters simply stared at each other across the small remaining distance, both seemingly unable to believe the reality of the other's presence. Then they were moving, closing the gap between them, arms enfolding each other in an embrace that bridged more than physical distance. Abigail felt tears on her cheeks, matching those on her sister's face. "How?" she managed finally, pulling back to look at Rebecca's face. "How did you find me?" "It's a long story," Rebecca replied, wiping tears with the back of her gloved hand. "One I've been living in for months now." She glanced over Abigail's shoulder at the gathered Shoshone, her expression curious rather than fearful. "And it seems you have quite a story of your own to tell." Lieutenant Reynolds and the young soldier had reached them now, dismounting respectfully at a short distance. The lieutenant saluted Keme and Takoda before addressing Abigail. "Miss Harmon, the younger Miss Harmon, that is, arrived at Fort Bridger 2 weeks ago, searching for you. When she learned of your unique situation, she insisted on coming. To see you personally." His tone conveyed a certain admiration for Rebecca's determination. "Given our agreement with Chief Running Elk, I offered military escort." Chief Running Elk had joined them now, his weathered face solemn as he studied the newcomers. After Kim translated the lieutenant's explanation, the chief gestured toward the center of camp. "Bring sister to the fire circle," he said in his limited English. "Share food, hear stories. Army men wait here with warriors." The invitation was clear. Rebecca was welcome, but military presence would remain at the perimeter. Lieutenant Reynolds nodded, understanding. "We'll wait, Miss Rebecca. Take whatever time you need." As they walked toward the central fire pit, Rebecca couldn't stop staring at the camp, at the lodges being dismantled, the people going about their work, the obvious signs of Abigail's integration into this community. "You actually live with them," she said, wonder and confusion mingling in her voice. "The lieutenant told me, but I couldn't quite believe it until now." "It's my home," Abigail replied simply. "Has been since winter." Rebecca shook her head in amazement. When I finally tracked you to Wyoming territory, people in town told me wild stories, that you'd been captured, that you'd lost your mind, that you'd turned Indian. I didn't know what to believe. Her gaze lingered on Takoda, who walked several paces behind them, giving the sisters space for reunion, while remaining protectively close. But I never expected this. They reached the fire circle where Mapia was already arranging sitting, blankets, and directing a young woman to prepare tea. The old woman appraised Rebecca with keen interest, noting the resemblance between the sisters despite their different coloring. "Your blood speaks in your faces," she observed after introductions. "Same spirit in the eyes." Rebecca accepted the offered tea with impeccable manners, though her gaze continuously darted around, taking in every detail of her surroundings. She sat close to Abigail, as if afraid her sister might vanish if she allowed any distance between them. "Now," Abigail said gently, "tell me how you came to be here. Last I knew, you were staying with Aunt Constance in Boston." Rebecca's story unfolded gradually, interrupted occasionally by her questions about the camp or by Mapia's quiet instructions to those preparing for the migration. After Abigail and Thomas had left for the West, life in Philadelphia had become increasingly difficult. Aunt Constance, their mother's older sister, had grown demanding and resentful of Rebecca's presence in her home. "She made it clear I was a burden," Rebecca explained, her voice tight with old pain. "When a letter finally came from Thomas last summer, saying you'd established a homestead, I decided to join you." She looked down at her hands. "But arranging passage took months. By the time I reached St. Louis, winter had set in, and I had to wait until spring to continue. The journey that followed had been arduous. Steamboat up the Missouri as far as possible, then overland by stagecoach and wagon, train. When she finally reached Cheyenne, she learned of Thomas's death months earlier. "I almost turned back then," Rebecca admitted. "But I've come so far, and I thought you might need me." Her eyes glistened. "I followed your trail to the settlement, only to find your cabin abandoned. People there told me such strange stories. Some said you'd been kidnapped by Indians. Others that you'd gone willingly after nursing an injured warrior." Abigail squeezed her sister's hand, "both true and untrue in different ways." With gentle prompting from Mapia, Abigail shared her own story. Finding Takoda in the river, nursing him back to health, the confrontation with the soldiers, and her decision to join the Shoshone. As she spoke, Takoda added occasional details from his perspective, his English now considerably improved through months of practice with Abigail. Rebecca listened with widening eyes, her initial shock gradually giving way to a more complex reaction. Part amazement, part admiration, part lingering concern. "And you've been happy here?" she asked finally. "Truly happy?" "Happier than I've been since before Mother and Father died," Abigail answered honestly. "I've found purpose here. Community. Belonging." Her eyes met Takoda's briefly, conveying without words the deeper connection she'd discovered. Rebecca followed the glance, her expression thoughtful. "I see," she said softly. Then, more briskly, "Well, this certainly explains why Lieutenant Reynolds was so reluctant to bring me here. He kept insisting you weren't a captive, that coming might complicate matters." "He was being protective," Takoda observed. "Of peace we built, hard-won thing." The afternoon passed in continued conversation, the sisters bridging the gap of their separation, while Takoda and Mapia provided context for Shoshone customs that Rebecca found puzzling. As the sun began its western descent, camp preparations continued around them, a reminder that the band would depart for summer hunting grounds within days. Finally, Rebecca asked the question that had been hovering unspoken. "What happens now? Abby, will you come back with me?" The directness of the query hung in the air. Takoda's face remained carefully neutral, though Abigail could read the tension in his shoulders. Mapia watched with ancient eyes that had witnessed countless human decisions. "I can't, Rebecca," Abigail said gently. "My life is here now." Her sister's face fell, though not with the shock or outrage such a statement might once have provoked. Hours of conversation had prepared her somewhat for this answer. "Because of him?" Rebecca asked, glancing toward Takoda. "Because of everything," Abigail clarified. "Because I've found something here I never had before, a place where I'm valued for my skills, my thoughts, my contributions, not just tolerated. As someone's spinster sister, or pitied as a woman alone." She took Rebecca's hands in hers. "But that doesn't mean we must be separated again." Rebecca looked confused. "What do you mean?" Abigail turned to Mapia, seeking confirmation for what she was about to propose. The old woman nodded almost imperceptibly. She had anticipated this moment. "Stay with us," Abigail suggested. "Not forever if you don't wish it, but for a time. See how we live, truly live, before you decide your own path." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Stay? Here? With—" She gestured vaguely at the camp around them. "With my people," Abigail finished firmly, "who would welcome you as they welcomed me." Mapia spoke up, her English careful but clear. "Sister of woman who saves would have place in circle, would learn, would teach. All paths cross for purpose." Rebecca looked overwhelmed by the suggestion. I don't know the first thing about living like this. I can barely ride a horse, as the lieutenant can attest." She glanced toward the camp's edge, where Reynolds and his companion still waited patiently. "And what would people say?" "The same things they say about me, I imagine," Abigail replied, with a small smile. "But does that matter more than finding your own truth?" The question struck home. Rebecca had, after all, defied convention to travel alone across half a continent in search of her sister. That journey had required courage, determination, and a willingness to step beyond the narrow confines of what Boston society deemed appropriate for a young woman. "How would it work?" she asked finally, neither accepting nor rejecting the invitation. "Practically speaking." Chief Running Elk, who had been observing quietly throughout much of the conversation, spoke through Takoda's translation. "Young sister stays as honored guest, learns our ways through summer season. When leaves fall, chooses path, to stay or return to White World. No shame in either choice." It was a generous offer, one that acknowledged both the bonds of family and the reality that Rebecca might ultimately choose a different path than her sister. The wisdom of it seemed to register with Rebecca, whose expression shifted from uncertainty to cautious consideration. "I would need to send word to Boston," she said slowly, "and collect my trunks from Fort Bridger." Hope bloomed in Abigail's chest. "Does that mean you'll consider it?" "It means," Rebecca replied with the first genuine smile since their initial embrace, "that I didn't come all this way just to turn around without truly understanding the life you've chosen." As twilight approached, Lieutenant Reynolds was invited into the camp to discuss arrangements. He seemed unsurprised by Rebecca's decision to stay, at least temporarily. "Judge Hollister anticipated something of the sort," he admitted. "He's already drafted paperwork extending the protection of our agreement to cover both Harmon sisters." A wry smile touched his lips. The colonel was less pleased, but the judge can be quite persuasive when he chooses. Plans were made for a small party, including Takoda and Kame, to accompany Rebecca back to Fort Bridger the following day. She would collect her belongings and send necessary correspondence before joining the band on their journey to summer hunting grounds. As darkness fell and fires were lit throughout the camp, Abigail found a moment alone with Takoda near the river's edge. The water ran high with spring melt, its surface catching the first stars of evening in rippling reflections. "You didn't tell her everything," he observed quietly. "About us." Abigail smiled, her hand finding his in the gathering darkness. Some things need to be experienced, not just explained. She'll see for herself in time. What Rebecca would see, what the entire band had witnessed developing through the winter months, was a bond that had grown from mutual respect into something deeper. Dakota and Abigail had not yet formalized their relationship. Shoshone custom dictated a proper courting period, especially for a union that crossed cultural boundaries, but their intention was clear to all who knew them. "Your sister is brave," Dakota said. "Like you, crosses boundaries others fear." "It runs in the family," Abigail replied. "Our mother scandalized Boston by marrying a doctor with radical ideas and no fortune. Our father defied convention by educating his daughters as thoroughly as any sons might have been." She gazed at the flowing river. "Perhaps we were always meant to be bridge builders." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the water that had first brought them together. So much had changed since that winter day. Dakota's body had healed. Abigail had found her place among his people. Tensions with the settlement had eased, if not disappeared entirely. Yet the core truth revealed in that moment of rescue remained. Sometimes the most meaningful paths appear when we least expect them, requiring only the courage to step forward. The next morning it dawned clear and mild. Rebecca, having spent the night in Mapia's lodge, emerged looking surprisingly refreshed, despite the unfamiliar sleeping arrangements. She had exchanged her formal traveling clothes for a simpler outfit Abigail had helped her assemble, a practical skirt, sturdy blouse, and moccasins that would serve better for the journey ahead than her city-made boots. "How do I look?" she asked, twirling once with uncharacteristic playfulness. "Properly scandalous for a Boston lady." "Properly practical for the path ahead," Abigail corrected, adjusting the shawl draped around her sister's shoulders. "Mapia says you have the hands of a healer. She wants to teach you about plants when you return." Rebecca looked pleased by this assessment. "I always did have a knack for father's remedies. Perhaps there's use for that knowledge here." The small party prepared to depart for Fort Bridger. Kem, Dakota, 3 warriors, Rebecca, and Lieutenant Reynolds, with his young companion. They would return within 5 days, meeting the main band at the first summer campsite near Painted Rock Valley. As they mounted their horses, Chief Running Elk approached, presenting Rebecca with a small carved token, a circle containing 2 stylized birds in flight. "Sisters fly together," he explained through Dakota's translation. "Different wings, same sky." Rebecca accepted the gift with genuine gratitude, clearly touched by the gesture from this imposing elder. "Thank you," she said, then carefully added the Shoshone word Abigail had taught her, Aishen. The chief's weathered face creased in approval. As the party rode away, Rebecca turned in her saddle to wave once more to Abigail, her expression a complex mixture of uncertainty and anticipation, the face of someone stepping into the unknown. With equal measures of courage and faith, Mapia came to stand beside Abigail as the riders disappeared over the eastern ridge. "Circle turns," the old woman observed. "You pulled him from ice. Now you pull sister from different kind of frozen water." The insight struck Abigail with its simple truth. Rebecca had been trapped in her own way, by society's expectations, by limited options, by grief and loss, just as real as what Abigail had experienced. Perhaps this unexpected journey would free. Her sister, as Abigail herself, had been freed by her choice to save a stranger that winter day. The future becomes something new with each sunrise, Mapia continued, her ancient eyes regarding Abigail with affection. "But spirits knew your path. Before you walked it, showed your face to my grandson for a reason that now unfolds like spring flowers." The camp was nearly dismantled now, the band ready to begin their seasonal migration as soon as the scouting party returned from Fort Bridger. Abigail looked around at what had become home, not the physical location which would change with The seasons, but the people who had accepted her, taught her, and ultimately embraced her as one of their own. When Takoda had first told her of his vision, her face appearing to him days before their actual meeting, she had been skeptical, uncertain what to make of such claims. Now, with the perspective of months lived among the Shoshone, she recognized deeper patterns at work, not just in the spiritual realm Takoda and his people inhabited so comfortably, but in the intricate web of choices, chances, and consequences that shaped all human lives. She had pulled a wounded warrior from river ice. He had shown her a way of life beyond the narrow confines she had known. Together, they had defended that life against those who would destroy it through ignorance and fear. And now, incredibly, her sister had journeyed across a continent to discover this new reality for herself. The circle was indeed completing, not ending, but turning toward fresh possibilities, new understandings, unexpected connections. As the band began its journey toward summer hunting grounds, Abigail walked beside Mapia, their steps aligned despite the decades that separated their births. Behind them stretched one season, ahead lay another, and between them flowed the river of shared experience that had transformed a desperate rescue into something far more profound. A bridge between worlds that had seemed impossibly distant, until one woman dared to cross the ice. The path ahead would not be easy. Challenges remained, from settlers like Mackie who clung to hatred, from a government intent on confining native peoples to reservations, from the inevitable friction of different cultures learning to coexist. But Abigail faced these prospects not with fear, but with determination. She had found her purpose in this unexpected life, to stand at the crossroads of understanding, to demonstrate through her choices that compassion could transcend boundaries, that wisdom could be shared across divides, that love, ultimately, recognized no borders drawn by human prejudice. As the last lodge was packed and the band moved out, following ancient trails toward summer abundance, Abigail cast one final glance back at the winter camp, at the river that had changed everything, at the place where she had discovered her truest self. "Thank you," she whispered to whatever forces had guided her to that frozen riverbank months ago. Mapia, walking beside her, caught the words and smiled. "Never thank spirits for a journey not yet complete," she advised. "Better to show gratitude by walking on a path with an open heart." Abigail nodded, turning her face forward to the trail ahead. Open heart, clear eyes, steady purpose, these would be her guides now, as they had been since the day she pulled a wounded warrior from the river ice and found in his face a reflection of her own humanity. The circle completes, but the story continues. In each choice made with courage, each bridge built with understanding, each life transformed by the simple, profound act of reaching across the divide to recognize in a stranger's eyes the common spirit that binds us all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.